Chapter 437. After Eric rejected the conditions proposed by Disney shareholders in private, Disney's shareholders authorized Disney's management to negotiate with Firefly and Viacom. In order to keep his position, Michael Eisner spared no effort to help Viacom in all aspects. Any contact between Disney and Firefly in the negotiations would be immediately received by Viacom's team. Back then, when Michael Eisner followed Viacom's announcement, Firefly's team had already expected this situation and had been prepared for it. When Disney's shareholders decided to sell Disney, the negotiations between Disney's management and Viacom and Firefly sped up. After several bids, the full acquisition price rose to $5.6 billion in just 2 weeks. This price was already $2.1 billion higher than Disney's market value of $3.5 billion when Firefly first offered. The premium reached 60%. In most previous hostile acquisitions, when the premium exceeded 50%, the hostile acquirer would often give up. However, Firefly and Viacom had no intention of backing down. Whether it was in public or private, the confrontation between the two parties became more and more intense. In view of this situation, many analysts on Wall Street issued a risk warning for this acquisition. Some companies that had originally planned to join the acquisition saw the competition between the two parties and silently threw the acquisition plans that they had prepared into the wastebox. On January 14, 1992, after months of lengthy negotiations, Disney, Firefly, and Viacom finally reached a preliminary agreement on various acquisition terms. The final bidding would be held on January 20th. After half a year of busy work, the exhausted Firefly acquisition team could finally take a short break. Eric was still busy preparing for Firefly's 1992 movie project. After the release of Dumb and Melon, many film companies immediately contacted Jim Carrey, hoping to cooperate with him. Although Dumb and Melon was a two-lead film, film critics and ordinary audiences all praised Jim Carrey's performance. The other male lead, Jeff Daniels, received an average rating. Coupled with the fact that the box office of Dumb and Melon exceeded $100 million, Jim Carrey's salary skyrocketed to $5 million. With his net worth rising, his state of mind was different from before. In the beginning, as long as there was an opportunity, he was willing to pay any price. However, now he felt that he had suffered a great loss. In an interview with a Hollywood newspaper, Jim Carrey publicly expressed his dissatisfaction with the 5-year option contract that he was forced to sign. However, when they heard this news, neither Eric nor TG's women were too concerned. The option contract was drafted by Firefly's special legal team. There were no loopholes in the law. If Jim Carrey wanted to breach the contract, he would have to obediently pay $100 million in liquidated damages even if he took the lawsuit to the federal Supreme Court. However, in order to prevent Jim Carrey from making a fuss every time he made a movie, Eric asked TG to offer Jim Carrey a $10 million contract for 2 movies. This was definitely not a bad deal. Eric had never thought of wanting a horse to run but not giving the horse enough to eat. However, when Elizabeth personally came to discuss this proposal, she did not see Jim Carrey at all. According to his agent, Carl Makerson, Jim Carrey had gone to Hawaii for a vacation. Of course, Elizabeth understood that Jim Carrey wanted a higher price. She even felt that Eric's offer was a little too high. Since the other party was not satisfied, Elizabeth directly ignored Jim Carrey. Although they had not reached an agreement with Jim Carrey, Firefly had successfully obtained the rights to Stranger in Disguise. They also poached the screenwriter of Detective Airplane, Tom Shadyac, from Warner Brothers. Eric directly sent the 2 movies to TG to set up the project and start the preliminary preparations. At the studio base in Playa Vista, Eric was leading a few people to visit the special effects studio of Digital Domain. The headquarters of Digital Domain was originally in Venice Beach, but after the studio base in Playa Vista was completed, Digital Domain moved there. On one hand, they could save a lot of money on rent. On the other hand, the studio was close to a large studio, so it was more convenient for them to work. This is the latest special effects software developed by the Software R&D Center. It's called Broken. It's mainly used to create scenes of buildings being smashed. As Stan Winston introduced the software, he personally pulled up a relevant scene from the computer. Eric and a few people around him gathered around. When they saw the scene of a drive-in theater slowly breaking under the influence of a hurricane, everyone let out a low gasp of admiration. This is only one of the completed scenes. There's another scene of an entire villa being torn apart, but this one is not completed yet. After Stan Winston finished his introduction, he switched the screen to the software interface and moved to the side. Standing next to Eric, a thin middle-aged man in his 30s could not help but sit on the office chair. He clumsily operated the computer to check the various options of the software. The functions of the software are still being perfected, but this is already much better than the original version, Stan Winston explained. Eric looked at the middle-aged man who was obviously not familiar with the software but was very interested. He smiled and said, "Roland, you're not thinking of changing your career to become a special effects artist, are you? We just signed the contract. I definitely won't let you go." Hearing Eric's joke, everyone laughed. Roland Emmerich also stood up with a smile. "I think I'd better be an honest director." James Cameron, who was standing to the right of Eric, said, "I don't think there's any essential difference between a director and a special effects artist. We're all creating images. It's just that the process is a little different." Although James Cameron did not invest in digital domain in this spacetime, he had a good relationship with Eric and Stan Winston, as well as his obsession with film technology. Every time Digital Domain came out with a new special effects treatment plan, Cameron would run over to try it out. Therefore, he did not approach them out of curiosity like Roland Emmerich. After joking for a while, Eric said, "Okay, we've seen so much. There's a cafe nearby. Let's go there and rest for a while." The few of them agreed and walked into the cafe. Because it was working hours, there were no employees in the cafe. Eric and the other 6 sat around a long table. In addition to Roland Emmerich and James Cameron, the other 3 were John Landau, Jerry Bruckheimer, and Gene de Bont. These future famous directors or producers in Hollywood were the results of Eric's recent work. Perhaps these names were unfamiliar, but when it came to movies like Titanic, 2012, Transformers, Speed, and other movies, they were like thunder to one's ears. And these people were the directors or producers of these movies. Among them, James Cameron and Jerry Bruckheimer were already famous. After Cameron completed Terminator 2, it was only natural that he would sign a contract with Firefly. Jerry Bruckheimer, on the other hand, was the producer of the famous Top Gun. It was unknown whether it was Cruise's success or failure. The success of Top Gun allowed Jerry Bruckheimer to become a famous producer. However, the box office of Cruise's Thunder Ambition, which cost 80 million yuan last year, was far lower than expected. As a result, Jerry Bruckheimer was terminated by his former employer, Paramount. Jerry Bruckheimer's future golden partner, Michael Bay, was still a rookie who had just started shooting music videos. Eric could not promote him to a director in haste. However, Eric did not hesitate to sign Jerry Bruckheimer because Jerry Bruckheimer was very good at being a producer of big-budget movies. Firefly lacked talents in this field the most. John Landau, Gene de Bont, and Roland Emmerich were not very famous now, but they had been in Hollywood for many years. Their personal ability was unquestionable. In addition, Eric happened to have projects that were suitable for them, so he signed them together. After the waiter served them coffee and left, Eric said, "After seeing what I just said, I think everyone has no concerns about the script I gave you, right?" Except for Stan Winston, who was leisurely drinking coffee, the others nodded. James Cameron said, "Eric, although the adapted script you gave me is good, I don't want to start working so soon. I want to enjoy life. I'm not a workaholic like you. Besides, Arnold has already accepted a contract with Sony Pictures. He will only be free next year." Eric said, "I know. I didn't arrange for you to be in the production plan this year." Ha ha ha, Jerry Bruckheimer said. "Eric, I remember that your producer has always been Mr. Jeffrey. Why did you choose me to be the producer of Jurassic Park?" "Jeffrey has to manage the company. He won't be the producer himself in the future. At most, he'll be the producer in name." After Eric explained, he looked at Roland Emmerich and said, "Roland, what do you think of the script for Clash of Worlds?" Roland Emmerich looked at Eric. The script was written by Eric himself. Although Eric was the most accomplished in this group of people, Roland Emmerich felt that the script was terrible. Roland Emmerich opened his mouth, but still asked cautiously, "Eric, do you want to hear the truth?" "Of course." Eric nodded. I think this script is a bit bad. The main story is about humanity facing a great crisis, but in the first half an hour of the story, the female lead has been entangled in scandals of high officials, which is very inappropriate." James Cameron heard their discussion and interrupted, "Eric, is this your idea for the movie about a comet hitting the Earth?" Eric nodded and briefly explained the script that he had already completed. After hearing that, James Cameron shook his head. "I feel the same as Roland. Although the public is always interested in talking about scandals, it's terrible for a disaster blockbuster to use such a plot as a foreshadowing." Jean de Bont, who had been quiet all this time, couldn't help but say, 7 years ago, I was the cinematographer for a low-budget sci-fi movie. I think the movie's setting was good. It used family and love, or the lives of small characters as the foundation for a greater contrast. It also made it easier to bring the audience into the story. They all nodded. Eric saw that no one agreed with the original script, but he wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "I know, but we'll have to change the script a lot." "Then we'll change everything." James Cameron didn't have any scruples. He said, "It'll be a pity if such a good theme for a disaster movie is ruined by a terrible story." "I think that a little modification would make the story even better," the chubby John Rando interjected. John Rando attracted everyone's attention and said, "Look, the female lead has been tracking the official involved in the scandal with a code name. This code name originally referred to a woman. What if we change this code name to the comet?" Eric's eyes lit up, but James Cameron slammed the table. "That's even better. We'll change the setting slightly and remove the scandal factor." The White House hid the news to avoid panic and used a woman's code name to represent the comet. The high-ranking official who was misunderstood to be involved in the scandal and was forced to resign actually wanted to reveal the truth to the public. His proposal wasn't approved, so he resigned in anger. Jerry Bruckheimer nodded and said, "Eric, I think this is a good change. Although the public will always have some opinions about the Federation and feel that it's full of all kinds of conspiracy theories, in general, ordinary people still have good fantasies about the upper echelons. This setting just happens to meet the expectations of the public." Eric smiled and said, "Then we'll change it like that. Jim, John, do you want to add your names to the screenwriter column?" Cameron and John Rando shook their heads at the same time. They both knew that Eric was just joking. Although 1/3 of Hollywood scripts had disputes over authorship rights, in order to get authorship rights, they had to participate in more than 30% of the script's changes. Since they had already started talking, after the crash, Eric took out the scripts of True Lies, Jurassic Park, and Speed, which the few of them had directed respectively. They got quite a lot of inspiration. It wasn't until evening that the few of them parted ways. After sending Cameron and the others off, Eric was about to get into the car and go back to Malibu, but he was stopped by Stan Winston. "Eric, there's something I can't tell you. They were here just now." Stan Winston pointed at the office not far away. "Let's go back and talk about it." Eric looked at Stan Winston's serious expression and nodded. He gave a few instructions to the driver and followed Stan Winston back to the office. "To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile users, please read it at M." Chapter 438. Dennis Noel resigned last week. Do you still remember? "He personally demonstrated a special effects scene for you," Stan said as soon as the two returned to the office. Eric tried to recall and remembered the special effects artist named Dennis Noel that Stan Winston mentioned. He was a tall and skinny white man in his early 30s. He graduated from the computer science department of Stanford University. Stan Winston had also introduced him to Eric about his outstanding performance in the post-production of Tornado. Was he poached by someone else? Eric asked. If it was a normal resignation, Stan Winston would not have brought it up. Stan Winston nodded and said, Sony Pictures is planning to set up their own film and television special effects subsidiary company. They invited Dennis to be the director. We can't stop people from going to higher places. But is there anything else? Stan Winston took out a form from his desk and handed it to Eric. He said, "Eric, look. Since the release of Terminator 2, 12 outstanding special effects artists have resigned. 2 of them are directors. There are even more ordinary employees who have resigned, but I didn't count them." Eric took the form and looked at it. Not only did it show the time of resignation, it also showed where they went. Most of them were poached by other special effects companies, including the biggest competitor in the digital domain, Industrial Light and Magic. In addition, a few of them had set up their own special effects studio. Your side is better. Eric looked at the form and smiled at Stan Winston. He said, "The situation at Pixar is worse. John even submitted a report to me. He hopes to prevent this from happening through restrictive measures such as non-competition agreements." You don't seem worried at all? Stan Winston's worried expression eased a lot when he saw Eric smile. Eric put down the form and looked at Stan Winston. He said, "Stan, do you know how much R&D funds I've invested in Pixar and Digital Domain's R&D teams since I took over?" Stan Winston shook his head. He was more concerned about the technical aspects of special effects. He had never cared much about finances. When Firefly was reorganized last year, Eric separated the research and development teams of Pixar and Digital Domain from the 2 companies and handed them over to Ed Kamal alone. It was even more impossible for Stan Winston to be aware of this. Eric recalled the data in his mind and slowly said, "Ed Kamal already has more than 400 permanent members in his research and development team. These are all the best technical talents in various fields. Their average annual salary is about $100,000. Just this alone consumes $40 million a year. Pixar and Digital Domain's R&D teams have also reached 600 people. The average annual salary of these people is not much lower than those people. That's another $60 million. In addition, Firefly has also invested in 3 R&D centers at Stanford University, the University of Washington, and the University of California. The best scientists in these R&D centers provide higher-level technical support to Pixar and Digital Domain. That's another huge expense. Stan Winston was shocked. He did not expect Eric to be so willing to spend money. If that was the case, Eric had invested at least $200 million in the past few years. In a situation where the future of CG special effects and 3D animation was completely uncertain, Eric was probably the only person who dared to spend $200 million on this project. Eric looked at Stan Winston's shocked expression and continued, "Firefly's 1990 profit is estimated to be $400 million. But in fact, because of the huge expenditure on R&D, Firefly's profit last year was only a little over $200 million. Stan Winston also relaxed. He completely understood why Eric said all this. It was a pity to lose technical talent, but it was not enough to shake Digital Domain and Pixar's position in the industry. Because in Hollywood, other than Firefly, no other company would invest so much in technology. Industrial Light and Magic had always maintained a leading position in the special effects industry. But as the focus of film and television special effects shifted from model special effects to computer special effects, Industrial Light and Magic, which had previously focused more on model special effects, was destined to fall behind Digital Domain. One step behind almost meant that they would always fall behind. Since the release of Terminator 2, Digital Domain had received several special effects film production projects. In the past, these were usually only done by Industrial Light and Magic. Digital Domain received these projects and could accumulate more technology in production projects. If this virtuous cycle continued, Industrial Light and Magic would no longer be able to catch up or even surpass Digital Domain. Thinking of this, Stan Winston smiled faintly and said, $200 million in profit is not bad. There are only a few of the 7 major film companies that have annual profits of more than $200 million. This year, Disney, MGM, and Paramount all lost money. Or rather, Hollywood is now back to being the 8 major film companies. Eric said, after buying Disney, it will be the 7 major film companies again. Stan Winston thought of the crazily rising price of Disney from Firefly and Viacom. Although he was curious, he did not ask. A multi-billion-dollar deal was too far away for him. By the way, Eric, after Dennis Noel left, he asked me if he could buy the right to use Maya and other software from Digital Domain. I remember you mentioned this before? Eric had indeed considered monopolizing the special effects software. In the original Spacetime, it was Autotech that monopolized the film and television special effects software. Maya, 3D Max, and other mainstream special effects software were all products of Autotech. However, that was 10 years later. Now, special effects companies were still in a noble stage. It was not something that could be set up by a dozen or so technicians 10 years later. Therefore, now was not the best time to make money through special effects software. The most important task for Digital Domain now was to accumulate technology and reach a position that no other company in the industry could reach. Once the special effects industry became commonplace, Digital Domain, with its strong technical accumulation, could enter the special effects software market at any time. Don't do that for now. At this stage, it is most important to maintain the lead of Digital Domain's technology. Since they have chosen to leave, let's start from scratch, Eric said with a faint smile. I will get the legal department to keep an eye on this area. If these people are suspected of technology infringement, I will make them and their backers pay the price. I understand. Stan Winston nodded and looked at his watch. It was long past the time to get off work. Eric, why don't we have dinner together? There are quite a few good restaurants in Venice. Since there was nothing else to do, Eric happily agreed. A week slowly passed. The final competition between Viacom and Firefly slowly arrived. On January 18th, 2 days before the bidding deadline, Firefly announced to the media their plans for 4 blockbuster movies, including Jurassic Park and Clash of Worlds. At the same time, they published a promotional poster for Tornado on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. They also announced that Tornado would play a 1-minute 30-second trailer at the Super Bowl. Almost at the same time, Viacom also stated that once they successfully acquired Disney, Viacom would spend $500 million to produce 6 to 8 special effects movies. Because they had tasted the sweetness of high investment and high returns from blockbuster movies, the scale of investment in Hollywood movies had increased over the past 2 years. Announcing such news also increased the confidence of all parties. After the last week of competition, January 20th finally arrived. Although Eric was 100% confident, he still woke up before 5 o'clock and took a car to the Disney headquarters in Burbank at 8 o'clock. Seeing the appearance of Eric's car, hundreds of reporters who had been waiting outside Disney's headquarters all night swarmed forward and surrounded Eric's car. While the flashes lit up crazily, all kinds of questions from outside the car window also drilled into Eric's ears. Eric, who was stuck in the car, pushed the door hard but couldn't open it. He could only patiently wait for Disney security personnel to come and maintain order. After waiting for 2 or 3 minutes, the bodyguards in Eric's other car and the Disney headquarters security personnel finally broke through the crazy crowd of reporters and came to Eric's car. Mr. Williams, after the acquisition, will Firefly retain the Disney brand? Will Disneyland be renamed Firefly Park? Will Firefly put Pixar Studios in Disney? It is said that Disney executives signed a golden parachute compensation agreement of up to US $500 million. After the acquisition of Firefly, will Disney's management be replaced on a large scale? According to convention, these questions would be answered at the press conference after the acquisition, but the surrounding reporters were obviously more interested in the latest news. However, after the human wall was finally pushed away, Eric didn't dare to stop to answer any questions. He hurried to the Disney headquarters office building. 2 minutes later, Eric finally stepped into the lobby of Disney's headquarters, and a large number of reporters were blocked outside the door. Eric took a deep breath and followed the Disney staff to a spacious lounge. As soon as he pushed the door open, Eric saw an old man reading the newspaper sitting on the sofa across from him. The old man was a little chubby, but the most striking thing was the scar left behind by the burn on his face. Obviously, this old man was the famous Sam Lei Shedong. Eric didn't expect their first meeting to be in this situation. He looked at the guide next to him. The young girl was also a little surprised. She then realized that she brought him to the wrong room. This was the lounge of the Viacom team. Although Eric didn't mind leaving, in the face of Lei Sherdong's undisguised threatening gaze, leaving now was undoubtedly showing weakness. With a calm smile, Eric took the initiative to walk over to Lei Sherdong. He politely extended his hand and said, "Mr. Lei Sherdong, we finally meet." Lei Sherdong let out a disdainful snort. He looked at Eric's extended hand and then raised the newspaper again, ignoring Eric. The female staff member who brought Eric to the wrong room was even more frightened. If the two of them had a conflict, her job would be gone. The female staff member looked at Eric nervously, but she saw that Eric didn't seem to care too much. He shrugged, withdrew his hand, and sat down on the sofa. He looked at the staff member who brought him here and said, "Miss Gleason, can you make me a cup of coffee? No sugar, more milk." "Ah, okay. The staff member quickly ran to prepare the coffee for Eric. Eric also picked up a prepared newspaper from the coffee table and flipped through it. "Young man, it's better not to bite off more than you can chew." Eric was reading an analysis article about the acquisition when an old but vigorous voice suddenly sounded in his ears. Eric put down the newspaper and looked at Lei Sherdong. He smiled and said, "Mr. Lei Sherdong, are you talking to me?" Lei Sherdong snorted again and said, "Your luck is very good. The movies you produce often achieve good box office, but acquiring Disney isn't as simple as luck." Eric was not surprised by Lei Sherdong's coldness and mockery. It was good enough that this hot-tempered tycoon didn't point at his nose and yell at him. After all, Lei Sherdong was someone who would call his son an idiot in public. In Lu Zhou's memory, Lei Sherdong had sued his wife, son, daughter, and nephew. His bad temper was evident. In the face of the old man's aggressiveness, although Eric didn't care too much, he didn't intend to tolerate it either. He retorted, "I remember someone said that luck is also a kind of strength. Also, I think that as an old man who's almost 70 years old, you shouldn't fight with us young people for these things. Enjoying your life is the best choice." Lei Sherdong glanced at Eric and said with a faint smile, "Actually, your film company is not bad. If it goes public, remember to tell me. Viacom is very interested." Eric shook his head and said, "No, you're wrong, Mr. Lei Sherdong. Although going public is the choice of most companies, I prefer to control everything in my own hands. However, I'm also very interested in Viacom, such as MTV." "Heh, you really overestimate yourself. This is the funniest joke I've heard recently." Lei Sherdong laughed. "Whether it's a joke or not, you'll know in a few years." Eric took the coffee handed over by the female employee, looked at Lei Sherdong, and continued, "Since I stepped into Hollywood, many people have been saying that I'm overestimating myself, and then they can't do anything about it as they watch me continue to overestimate myself step by step. You'll see this scene too." Chapter 439. Unknowingly, 6 hours had passed and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. To prevent missing the latest news, all the reporters waiting outside Disney's headquarters did not leave. If there was a partner, one of them could buy lunch. If the reporters came alone, they could only starve. Elizabeth from the Philadelphia Evening News was one of the starving reporters. Compared to the nationally renowned newspapers, the Philadelphia Evening News was not as large in scale and reputation. They could only send one reporter to Los Angeles to follow up on the largest acquisition in Hollywood history. It was January in Los Angeles, and even at the warmest moment of the afternoon, it was only a dozen degrees. Elizabeth squeezed into the crowd and tightened her beige windbreaker. She looked at the entrance of Disney's headquarters again, hoping to hear some news. In a conference room at Disney's headquarters, the confrontation between Viacom and Firefly had reached its final stage. Both parties' bids had soared from the initial $5 billion to $3 billion. At the moment, Firefly was leading the bid. On Viacom's side, just as Bernie Sanders had analyzed, after the bid exceeded $6 billion, Lei Sherdong's mood became obviously hesitant and anxious. Eric thought that Lei Sherdong's next bid would be lowered to the tens of millions, but not long after, Viacom directly offered $6 $5 billion. Eric, this must be Viacom's last bargaining chip, Bernie Sanders said to Eric after hearing the bid. Eric glanced at his watch. It was 3:15 p.m., less than 2 hours before the closing time of 5 p.m., which was also the final bidding time for this acquisition. At this time, Lei Shedong directly increased the bid from $6.3 billion to $6.5 billion. The intention of the last gamble was obvious. Unfortunately, Viacom did not know how much bargaining chips Eric had. In the face of Eric's huge capital of $8 billion, Viacom's limit of less than $7 billion could not win. After some discussion, Firefly quickly added $100 million, pushing the price to $6 billion. After Viacom's acquisition team heard Firefly's bid, there was a brief commotion, then they requested a pause from Disney. After that, Lei Shedong left with those people in a hurry. After half an hour, Lei Shedong returned to the conference room with his main deputy. Eric saw that Lei Shedong's side had lost half of its people at a glance. Lei Shedong had a big fight with the other shareholders. I estimate that $6 billion has already exceeded the psychological limit of the other shareholders of Viacom. Chris, who had just left and returned quickly, whispered to Eric and Bernie Sanders, "Those shareholders who had a falling out with Lei Shedong have already left. They even publicly announced to the reporters outside that they will no longer support Lei Shedong. If Lei Shedong insists on doing things his own way, they will sue him for abuse of power. Therefore, if Lei Shedong continues to bid, Viacom will find it difficult to complete the acquisition." Eric looked at Michael Eisner, who was not far away, and asked, "Does Disney know about this?" Chris understood that Eric was asking about Disney's shareholders. Disney's management had always been leaning towards Viacom. If they knew about this, they would most likely hide it from the shareholders. "I have already asked someone to leak the news to Disney's shareholders. They will definitely know what choice to make." At this point, Chris gave a congratulatory smile and patted Eric's shoulder lightly. "So, Eric, Disney is yours." Eric finally breathed a sigh of relief. Half a year of preparation, half a year of busy work, a full 12 months, the dust had finally settled. As Chris expected, Viacom's representative quickly expressed that they would give up on the bid. Lei Shedong looked indignant. He looked at Eric as if he wanted to swallow him whole. Although he had the intention to raise the price to $7 billion, Lei Shedong did not lose his mind despite his anger. He knew that this was not like the hostile acquisition of Viacom a few years ago. That time, his acquisition chip was the National Entertainment Company, which was his personal property, and he had absolute control over it. However, this time, Viacom's shares were not in his hands alone. If he forcefully raised the price and did not get the support of the other shareholders, the bid would eventually be declared invalid. Michael Eisner, who was originally full of confidence, felt uneasy when Viacom requested for a pause. Hearing that Viacom had given up on the acquisition, Michael Eisner's face instantly turned pale. A strong sense of anger and helplessness rose in him. Frank Wales, who was sitting beside Michael Eisner, saw his reaction. He had no choice but to take over Michael Eisner's work and stand up to announce the results of Firefly's bid. Although they had different thoughts, after the results were announced, there was still applause in the conference room. Lei Shedong left quickly with his men without saying a word. Michael Eisner, who had recovered, looked deeply at Eric and whispered a few words to Frank Wales. He also stood up and walked out of the conference room. On the other hand, the shareholders of Disney walked over to congratulate Eric warmly. Outside Disney's headquarters, from the moment some of Viacom's shareholders left, all the reporters had already guessed the result of the bid. Not long after, Lei Shedong left with his men, proving the result of the bid. However, Firefly's team did not come out even after an hour because they needed to sign the relevant contract with Disney's management. Could they have left through the back door? Firefly must want to expand the influence of this acquisition. How could they leave through the back door? It's not like this is a scandal. How much do you think the transaction price will be? About $6.5 billion. A classmate of mine works on Wall Street. I asked him about it and he told me. Elizabeth heard the discussions of her peers around her. She lowered her head and silently checked her camera and recorder. At that moment, someone shouted, "They're coming out." Elizabeth quickly looked up and saw the entrance of Disney's headquarters. The security guards quickly formed a human wall. 7 or 8 middle-aged men of different ages walked over with a young man in his 20s. The group of reporters began to stir. Elizabeth quickly squeezed forward. Perhaps she was lucky, but Elizabeth managed to squeeze to the front of the crowd. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, Firefly will hold a press conference at the headquarters. I hope everyone will be there on time, Eric said briefly and motioned for the security guards to push through the crowd. Elizabeth had just raised her camera and snapped a few photos of Eric when she saw that Eric had finished speaking and was about to leave. The large group of reporters certainly would not be satisfied with this answer. They had waited for a whole day to get the news as soon as possible. Therefore, before Eric even lifted his foot, the crowd seemed to explode with a violent force and surrounded Eric and the others. As Elizabeth was holding the camera, her center of gravity shifted upward. At the moment when the crowd exerted their strength, someone coincidentally stepped on her heel, causing her to instantly fall forward. The camera fell to the ground with a bang, breaking into pieces. She also let out a scream. Eric saw a woman in a beige trench coat being pushed down. He quickly motioned for the bodyguards to come forward and save her. If someone was trampled at this time, then a good thing would become a bad thing. Fortunately, the group of reporters still had some sense. After hearing a woman scream, they realized that an accident had happened. The force of the crowd weakened a lot. The 2 bodyguards beside Eric nimbly helped Elizabeth up and protected her in the middle of Eric's group as they walked to the parking lot. "Camera, my camera." Elizabeth woke up from a brief moment of fear and found that the camera hanging in front of her was gone. She quickly turned around and looked behind her. The Canon camera was the property of the newspaper and was worth more than $5,000. When she arrived, the editor-in-chief specifically told her to use it carefully. If she lost it, she would have to pay for it herself. Then, her work of more than 2 months would be gone. A strong hand immediately grabbed Elizabeth, who wanted to run back. "Miss, I'll get someone to pick it up later. For now, let's get out of here first." Elizabeth looked at the young man who pulled her, then looked at the crowd behind her. She was a little overwhelmed and followed the young man to the parking lot. She followed him into a black car. "Carter, help the lady find her camera." "It seems to be at the place where she fell," Eric said to the bodyguard in the front row after he was done. "Okay, Mr. Williams," the bodyguard said, then picked up the walkie-talkie and said a few words to the outside. The car slowly started. After a while, Elizabeth finally understood her situation. In a daze, she actually sat next to Eric Williams. This discovery made Elizabeth instantly forget the pain from her knee due to the fall. She glanced at the young man next to her and found that he was also looking at her. This made her even more nervous. She raised her hand and wanted to tidy up her hair, but she thought that it would be too pretentious. In the end, she gently put down her hand. Eric looked at the petite woman next to him. She had short black hair, big eyes, and thin lips with a hint of strange sexiness. "Can you smile?" Eric suddenly asked. Elizabeth was stunned for a moment before she reacted. "Mr. Williams, are you talking to me?" Seeing that she turned her head to look at him, Eric was even more certain. He repeated, "Can I smile?" Elizabeth did not dare to look directly at Eric's well-defined handsome face. She nodded a little self-abashedly and pursed her lips into a smile. Looking at the iconic naughty smile in front of him, Eric laughed too. At the same time, he was sure that he did not recognize the wrong person. "Someone said that you always look like you're thinking of something bad when you smile?" Elizabeth nodded subconsciously and shook her head violently. "No, I don't." Eric looked at the girl who was at a loss and laughed a few more times before saying, "I still don't know your name." "Oh, hello, Mr. Williams. I'm Elizabeth Fay." Elizabeth introduced herself politely. Eric continued to ask, "What's your middle name?" "I happen to know someone called Elizabeth too. I'll confuse the two of you. You can call me Tina. My full name is Elizabeth Tina Fay." As expected, It was Tina Fey. Eric felt that things had become very interesting. Why did you think of becoming a reporter? I wrote articles in the newspaper when I was in middle school. I majored in journalism when I was in university. Tina Fey thought that Eric's question was a little strange, but she still answered seriously. Haven't you thought of doing something else? Yes, I applied for drama at the University of Virginia, but I didn't get in. That's a pity, Eric said while shaking his head. In the past, Tina Fey was a scriptwriter for a few good works. Eric had watched her Mean Girls and the TV series I'm Crazy for Comedies. Perhaps it was because she had been a scriptwriter for Saturday Night Live for many years. Tina Fey's narration was a little exaggerated and always had the prank style of Saturday Night Live. Tina Fey did not know what Eric was thinking. However, she soon realized her identity and probed, "Mr. Williams, can I interview you?" Meeting an acquaintance from his previous life was always fate. Eric did not reject her and nodded with a smile, "Sure." Tina Fey heard Eric's answer and took out the recorder from her bag excitedly. She pressed the recording button and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Mr. Williams, may I know the final price that Firefly offered to acquire Disney?" $6. $6 billion. Tina Fey did not expect Eric to be so straightforward. She then asked boldly, "Then, will you put Firefly under Disney after this acquisition?" "No, Disney will become a wholly owned subsidiary of Firefly, just like the relationship between Sony Pictures and Columbia Pictures." "Will Disneyland change its name to Firefly Park?" "Disneyland is already a very mature brand. Firefly won't change its name rashly. How do you feel about becoming one of the 7 biggest movie companies in Hollywood when you're 20 years old?" "It's just the beginning. There's still a long way to go. So, Firefly will continue to expand." "Of course. Then, where will Firefly expand next?" "There's no plan at the moment. Firefly's main focus for the next few years is to integrate with Disney and develop itself." Both of them kept asking questions quickly. After a series of questions, a sly look flashed through Tina Fey's face. She asked all of a sudden, "How many girlfriends do you have?" "Yes." Eric stopped talking in time and looked at Tina Fey, who had a sly look on her face. He reached out his hand at lightning speed and snatched the recorder before she could react. Tina Fey saw Eric flipping a large part of the tape over. She pounced on him while begging for mercy. Don't rewind too much. Just the last part." I'll do it myself." Eric blocked Tina Fey's little hand that was grabbing at him and pressed the rewind button skillfully. Tina Fey let out a whine instantly. Chapter 440. Eric handed the recorder to the bodyguard Carter Moan, who was sitting in the front passenger seat after erasing the recording. He then said to Tina Fey, "I'll return it to you when we leave. Don't take it with you now." Tina Fey could tell that Eric had no intention of discussing with her from his tone. She knew that her little trick just now had upset him. She mumbled and agreed to it silently. After driving for over 20 minutes, Carter Moan, who was sitting in the front seat, received a call. He turned his head and said to Eric, "Mr. Williams, there are reporters gathering outside the hotel. They're calling to ask if we're going up from the main entrance or the elevator in the parking lot." Eric did not want to be surrounded again, so he said, "Let's go up from the elevator in the parking lot." Tina Fey waited for the both of them to finish talking. She could not help but ask curiously, "Where are we going?" "Acquiring Disney." "Of course, we're having a celebration party," Eric answered. He looked at Tina Fey and asked again, "Are you interested in going?" Tina Fey hesitated for a moment. She could not resist the temptation of a Hollywood party and nodded lightly. She thought it would be a more relaxed celebration party. She did not expect to find out that things were not as she imagined when she followed Eric into the banquet hall of the Hilton Hotel. The hall that was hundreds of square meters was crowded. The men were wearing formal suits while the women were wearing exquisite or gorgeous evening gowns. Tina Fey lowered her head and looked at her short beige windbreaker and washed jeans. She really had the urge to turn around and run away. Eric walked to the door and was about to enter. He realized that Tina Fey had stopped in her tracks with an awkward look on her face. He understood her situation in a blink of an eye. He waved his hand and called a hotel manager over. He whispered a few words and the manager said to Tina Fey politely, "Miss, please follow me." Tina Fey looked at Eric in confusion. Seeing that Eric nodded, although she did not know what to do, she followed the manager obediently and left. Anyway, it was better than staying here. She thought so in her heart. This disguise really made her embarrassed to the extreme. Anyway, even if Eric didn't say anything, she didn't plan to continue staying here. Before Tina Fey's figure disappeared, the people in the hall who noticed Eric's figure had already surrounded him. Eric smiled politely and walked forward to greet them one by one. In addition to the executives of Firefly, the CEOs or executives of several major film companies such as Fox, Paramount, and Universal all appeared in the banquet hall at this time. It could be said that it was another big gathering of Hollywood executives. Eric was not surprised by the appearance of these people. After Firefly acquired Disney, not only did it increase its own strength, but more importantly, it inherited Disney's position in the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA. If Firefly was just a chess piece in the big chessboard of Hollywood, then after joining the MPAA, Firefly's identity changed to a player who could set the rules of Hollywood's chessboard. The MPAA's position in the American entertainment industry was similar to a headquarters on the other side of the ocean. All of Hollywood's film ratings were in the hands of the MPAA. Take Terminator 2, for example. If Firefly had a seat in the MPAA, Terminator 2 would definitely have received a PG-13 rating instead of an R rating. In today's day, when the audience of young people was growing larger and larger, if a film was rated R, it meant that it would lose a large number of viewers before it was even released. Fortunately, Terminator 2 was good enough to offset the negative factors of the box office due to the rating. Of course, America had always claimed that it was a free country. Any film had the right to choose not to participate in the rating. However, all of the mainstream cinemas in the United States had signed an agreement with the MPAA to only show movies rated by the MPAA. If you did not participate in the rating, you would lose the opportunity to be released in mainstream cinemas and could only be shown in a small number of underground cinemas with extremely poor conditions. This pursuit of freedom brought more losses than a film rated NC-17. The reason why the declining MGM had always been known as one of the seven giants of Hollywood was not only because of its heritage accumulated for more than half a century, but the main reason was that MGM had its own seat in the MPAA. Even if its operating performance was always surpassed by second-tier film companies, no one could shake MGM's position. For Firefly, if they did not acquire Disney, they would have to go through a difficult game to join the MPAA. In addition to the movie rating power, the other main function of the MPAA was to lobby the federal government on behalf of Hollywood to amend relevant laws to protect the commercial interests of the seven giants. Looking at the young face of Eric, who had officially become one of the masters of Hollywood, the executives of the other major companies had an inexplicable sigh. They could not help but think of their situation when they were 20 years old. Eric, of course, could also understand the complex emotions of the people in front of him. After greeting them, Eric raised his glass to them and said, "Thank you very much for coming to this celebration in person. I hope everyone can have a wonderful night." The executives also responded and dispersed. Eric waited for the crowd to disperse and quickly caught up with Barry Diller, who was walking to the side. "Barry, can we talk over there?" Eric pointed to a round table not far away. Barry Diller nodded and followed Eric to the round table and sat down. Eric asked, "Barry, you're leaving in the middle of next month. Have you thought about what you want to do next?" Barry Diller smiled and said, "Eric, I know what you want to say, but I will never sign another employment contract." Since the 1970s, Barry Diller had led the two giants, Paramount and Fox, to rise again. When Firefly acquired Disney, Michael Eisner's resignation was inevitable. Barry Diller was undoubtedly the best candidate to replace Michael Eisner. Eric persuaded again, "Barry, why don't you listen to my conditions first?" "Eric, let's not talk about this topic anymore. Since I decided to leave last year, I've made up my mind to not just be an employee with a full wallet. I'm going to be 50 years old soon. I have to try to start my own business." "Then, okay. If you need help, such as funds, you can contact me at any time. Eric raised his glass to Barry Diller. Barry Diller also raised his wine glass and drank a mouthful of red wine. He said, "If Michael can't stay, maybe you can try Jeffrey Katzenberg. He and Michael were both my assistants. I think he's now qualified to be the CEO of Disney." Eric said, "Actually, I've also thought about this. But you know, Jeffrey is a workaholic. I heard that for a long time. He came to the office at 5 in the morning every day and worked 7 days a week. It's fine if that's all, but he always asks his subordinates to be workaholics like him. Although he's done well in the past few years, the entire production department has complained about him. I really don't know what will happen if Disney is handed over to him. This is just because of the different positions. Jeffrey is only in charge of a production department now. It's inevitable that he's a little radical. If he's the CEO of Disney, he'll definitely adjust his management style appropriately," Barry Diller said and looked at Eric. "Moreover, with you supervising from behind, it's unlikely that Jeffrey will mess around." "I'll talk to him," Eric said and asked, "What about you? What do you plan to do after you leave?" Barry Diller said, "I plan to travel around and visit some technology companies. Recently, after handing over most of my work, I suddenly had some free time. Only then did I realize that the world has changed drastically compared to 20 years ago. I recently bought a very interesting little thing. It's a PowerBook from Apple Computer. Do you know about it? I feel that this thing can change the whole world." "Of course I know. I've been using a laptop to handle some official business. The first one I used was IBM. Recently, I also bought a PowerBook 140, Eric answered. At the same time, he was surprised by Barry Diller's sharp intuition. He had always paid attention to Apple. Last year, when Apple released the first PowerBook 100, Eric bought one to play with. It was $2,500. It wasn't expensive, but it was definitely not cheap. It was just that the current laptop's configuration was maddeningly low. Even the latest PowerBook 140's configuration was only 4 MB of RAM and 120 MB of hard disk. Barry Diller looked at Eric with some surprise. He quickly felt that Eric was a young man and would definitely be more receptive to these new things than an old man like him. Immediately, he felt relieved. The two of them chatted for a while about their views on personal computers and computer networks before Barry Diller got up and left. "Eric, congratulations." As soon as Barry Diller left, Drew, who was wearing a rose-red dress, rushed over. Eric grabbed the little girl's waist and put her on the seat next to him. He looked up and saw another tall girl walking over. She smiled and greeted, "Claudia, why are you two together?" "I just passed the audition for Disguised Stranger," Claudia Schiffer explained as she sat down on the other side of Eric. Eric didn't pay much attention to Disguised Stranger during this period of time. He asked Drew, who was sitting on the other side, "Have you settled the contract with Jim Carrey?" Drew's tender face immediately showed a look of wanting to be praised. She stretched out 2 little fingers and shook them. "Yeah, 2 movies for $8 million. Eric was a little surprised. "What's going on? Didn't I ask you to give a package of $10 million? He asked for it. Drew's expression became a little angry. After the project was ready, we talked to him nicely 3 times, but he didn't give in. He also wanted $6 million for a single movie, and he was only willing to sign 1 movie. "Oh, then what happened?" Eric asked. Drew shrugged and said casually, "Then I sent them the contract directly. The first time, I sent them the contract with a remuneration of $10 million for 2 movies. The second time, it was reduced to $9 million. When I sent the contract with a remuneration of $8 million for the third time, they took the initiative to come over and sign the contract." Eric laughed and reached out to rub the girl's head. He praised, "Not bad, you have a future. By the way, why didn't I see Liz today? Mr. Murdoch didn't come either?" Their whole family went back to Australia. It seems like her grandmother's birthday is coming soon. Drew explained and asked, "Eric, who was that girl just now? You found a new one?" Eric asked subconsciously, "What girl?" Drew pouted. The one in the beige trench coat. Oh, you mean her? Eric was about to explain when he saw Tina Fey in a sky-blue dress appear in his field of vision. He quickly waved at her. Tina Fey carefully lifted the hem of the borrowed gown and walked over a little uneasily. Not bad. Very beautiful. Eric looked up and down at the approaching girl and commented. Tina Fey didn't feel the joy of a Cinderella becoming a princess at all. If the borrowed Armani custom-made dress on her was dirty or torn, she didn't know if she could afford it even if she sold herself. Drew quickly understood what Tina Fey was worried about from the way she walked. She didn't care that Eric was beside her and laughed. On the other side, Claudia Schiffer had been a model for a few years and often had to treat the works of famous designers carefully. Of course, she could understand Tina Fey's feelings. She also raised her wine glass to hide the smile at the corner of her mouth. Eric, aren't you being too petty? Since when did you fall in love with this type of girl? Drew whispered in Eric's ear as she watched Tina Fey sit down in front of the three of them. Eric glared at the girl to stop her from talking nonsense. He then introduced, "This is Tina Fey. She's a reporter. Tina, this is Drew and Claudia." Tina Fey wanted to correct him that she was called Elizabeth Fey, but seeing Eric's natural expression, she acquiesced and greeted Drew and Jillian politely. Eric didn't want Tina Fey to feel awkward in front of the two girls. He stood up and extended his hand to Tina Fey. "Let's have a dance together." "Oh, okay." Seeing Eric leaving with Tina Fey, Drew blinked and looked at Claudia Schiffer from head to toe. "What's wrong?" Claudia lowered her head and looked at her clothes. Drew shook her little head and sighed. "A man's heart is like a needle at the bottom of the ocean. A beauty like you is sitting here and he's taking a country bumpkin for a dance." Claudia was stunned. She glanced at Eric's figure not far away and couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. However, she couldn't help but defend Eric. "Mr. Williams is a gentleman. He's helping that lady out." Drew chuckled and whispered in Claudia's ear, "You'll know in the future that he's not a gentleman at all sometimes." Claudia's cheeks were slightly hot, but she was curious as she mumbled, "You?" "That's right." The last didn't wait for Claudia to finish stuttering and admitted it without hesitation. She then stared at Claudia and said with a smile, "You're not going to report him, are you?" Claudia quickly shook her head. She even regretted asking this question. Knowing this kind of thing wouldn't do her any good. Drew didn't say anything else. She stood up and extended her little hand to Claudia. "Beauty, can I have a dance with you?" Claudia took Drew's little hand and smiled. "Just the two of us?" "Of course, I don't want to dance with those stinky men. You're the best. You smell good." Claudia stood up helplessly and allowed Drew to pull her to the dance floor. Chapter 441. Tina Fey opened her eyes in a daze. What appeared in her field of vision was not a single room in a hotel in Burbank, nor was it her rented house in Philadelphia. Instead, it was a spacious round bedroom. The bedroom's decoration was very simple, but there was a sense of delicacy everywhere. The bright sunlight that came in through the gap of the curtain showed that it was already late. Moreover, she was the only one left in the bedroom. Tina Fey turned her body sideways and put one of her arms under her head. She stared at the lonely pillow on the other side in a daze. She felt a little lost. In Cinderella's story, Cinderella had no choice but to leave the prince after midnight and return to being a little maid in the kitchen. Although the ending was happy, the process was full of hardships. But now, she woke up in the prince's bedroom. She didn't return to her original state after midnight. She didn't know if she was lucky or unlucky. However, recalling everything that happened last night, Tina Fey could not help but smile faintly. Eric had gotten someone to prepare a beautiful evening gown for her, helped her to get rid of the awkwardness in front of the two girls, taught her how to dance on the dance floor, and introduced her to those big shots in Hollywood that could only be seen on television or in the newspapers. There were many moments when she really thought that she had become a princess. Then, after the cocktail party, Eric invited her and she accepted it boldly. That was how the current situation came to be. Tina Fey sighed again as she recalled the solemn vow that she had once made to never date a bad boy. She was a reporter, so of course she knew Eric's playboy nature better than ordinary people. However, no matter if it was in front of his wealth, power, or personal charm, her little vow was nothing to him. The bedroom door was pushed open softly. Tina Fey suddenly felt nervous as she did not know how to face Eric. She quickly closed her eyes and continued to pretend to be asleep. A crisp sound came. Tina Fey realized that it was a woman in high heels who came in. Perhaps she noticed that she was not awake yet, so the woman's footsteps became lighter. Tina Fey felt that the woman had walked to her side. The faint smell of perfume drifted over. Tina Fey was curious. Why would another woman appear here so early in the morning? Confused, she gently turned over and pretended to be awakened as she opened her eyes. The tall lady, Claudia Schiffer, whom she had chatted with last night, appeared before her. Claudia saw her open her eyes and hurriedly apologized. I'm sorry. Did I disturb you? Tina Fey sat up, looked at Claudia, and shook her head. It's all right, but why are you here? Claudia explained, I came back with Drew last night. You're a reporter, so you should know the relationship between Drew and Mr. Williams. Tina Fey nodded and looked at the table beside her. There were a few extra bags there, probably put there by Claudia just now. Claudia explained, these are your clothes. There's also a new set of underwear that Mr. Williams asked me to buy for you. Try it on, I wonder if it fits? Tina Fey nodded and looked at Claudia. Claudia blinked her eyes in confusion and soon waved her hand with a smile. All right, I'll go out first. After the bedroom door was closed, Tina Fey reached her hand out to take a look at the few bags. Inside were her windbreaker and jeans. There was also a bag that contained a set of exquisite underwear. The Armani gown she wore last night was nowhere to be seen. Of course, Cinderella didn't need a gown after the party. Tina Fey lifted the blanket and stepped on the cold floor. She was just about to put on her clothes when the bedroom door was suddenly pushed open again. Sorry, I forgot to tell you. Claudia poked her head in and opened her eyes wide in surprise. She didn't expect Claudia to turn around again. Tina Fey only relaxed after buttoning a button in a panic. She turned around and saw Claudia's surprised face. She asked, "What's wrong?" Claudia shook her head, but her eyes betrayed her thoughts. Tina Fey turned around and her face turned red instantly. She picked up a piece of clothing to cover her body in a panic. Miss Heaver, can you go out first? Claudia looked at Tina Fey, who looked like a frightened bunny. Not only did she not go out, she even approached her with a grin. She raised her eyebrows and asked curiously, "Hey, what's going on? Can you tell me?" Tina Fey bit her lips shyly and gathered her courage to glare at Claudia. Don't you think it's awkward to talk about this? If you want to know what's going on, you can try it yourself. Claudia stood up helplessly and said, seeing that she couldn't get anything out of her, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. The toiletries I prepared for you are in the bathroom opposite." I know. Tina Fey was still staring at Claudia with her eyes wide open. She was like a little pufferfish who had bumped into her natural enemy and inflated herself into a balloon. Claudia shrugged in amusement and waved her hand. "All right, get up now. I'm going down." Tina Fey waited for a while. After making sure that Claudia wouldn't come back, she walked over and locked the door. Only then did she feel relieved. Tina Fey took a long time to walk down the stairs because of the awkwardness earlier. She heard crisp laughter coming from afar. Realizing that she might be talking about what happened earlier, Tina Fey's footsteps hesitated. She remembered a certain culprit of the incident and cursed softly. She gathered her courage and walked up anyway. Drew and Claudia were kneeling next to a short table next to the glass wall. There were some books and documents scattered on the short table. Seeing Tina Fey, Drew glanced at the girl by instinct and greeted her with a smile. "Hi, Tina. Good morning." Tina Fey tried her best to act as if nothing happened. She walked over and sat on the carpet next to the short table. She greeted them with a smile. "Morning, what are you guys doing?" "Just doing some work," Drew said. Claudia put down the script in her hand and stood up. "Oh yeah, I'll get breakfast for you." Tina Fey was just about to stand up and go, but Claudia pressed her shoulder. Tina Fey didn't insist and sat back down. After Claudia left, Drew continued to pick up a pen and scribble on a document. He even put the pen cap under his chin and pondered for a moment from time to time. Tina Fey looked carefully at the pile of documents on the table. From the label on the cover, it should be a breakdown of the script, budget, and the like. Since Elizabeth had returned to Australia and Julia was just a decoration who didn't care about anything, a lot of TG's matters were on Drew's shoulders. Looking at the young face, Tina Fey had a complicated feeling in her heart. This girl wasn't even 18 yet, but she could already make decisions about movies that involved tens of millions of dollars. She was still just a small-time reporter. "Hey, Tina, how do you spell the word hypnosis?" Drew suddenly looked up and asked. Tina Fey thought for a moment and said, "Hypnotize." Drew wrote it down quickly and soon looked up again. "What about prank?" "Mere CHIEF," Tina Fey said without hesitation this time. "You're still the best. Claudia didn't even know that just now." "She's even dumber than me," Drew complimented after writing it down. "Hey, Drew, I'm German." Claudia happened to walk over with a small tray. She pushed the tray in front of Tina Fey and said, "I made it. I hope it'll suit your taste." Tina Fey thanked him and took a bite of the sandwich. She nodded with a smile. Claudia looked satisfied before turning to Drew and said, "Drew, I think you should hire an assistant." "I'm already looking for one, but there's no suitable one yet." Drew looked up and exchanged glances with Claudia. Both of them looked at Tina Fey at the same time. Tina Fey swallowed the food in her mouth and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" "Hey, Tina, you're a reporter?" "Yeah, Philadelphia Evening News. But this newspaper isn't very famous," Tina Fey said. Drew said, "Then how about you be my assistant?" Can I? I've only studied in community college for 2 years." Tina Fey shook her head in self-abasement. Drew waved her small hand. "This is Hollywood. The most unimportant thing is education. Even a guy like Chong Peters, who can't read more than a few words, can become the president of Columbia. What else is impossible?" Tina Fey put down the sandwich in her hand and asked Drew, "Why me?" Drew chuckled and said, "Because you can climb into Eric's company." "Stop joking." Tina Fey's face turned red again. "Of course I'm not joking. This means that you're very special," Drew said and pointed at Claudia. "Look, Claudia is prettier than you. She's taller and has a better figure than you. But she washed herself clean and sent herself to Eric, and he didn't like her." Claudia slapped Drew's hand mercilessly and said, "It's not like that. You're just messing around." "Humph. Do you want me to describe someone's pitiful appearance that night?" Drew immediately laughed and changed the topic. He turned to Tina Fey and asked, "How about it? Are you willing?" I'll think about it." Tina Fey was still a little hesitant. Drew added fuel to the fire and said, "Tina, this is a good opportunity. If you agree, you can stay in Hollywood and see Eric often. If you return to Philadelphia on the East Coast and continue to be a reporter, you might never see him again in your life." Tina Fey imagined the situation that Drew described in her heart and suddenly felt a strong sense of loss. She couldn't help but ask, "Oh yeah, where's Eric?" Drew saw that Tina Fey was already moved, so he didn't continue to persuade her. He said, "He went to the company early. He has a lot of things to do today." "Oh yeah, you can definitely see him on TV," Drew said and looked under the short table. He took out the remote control and turned on the TV not far away. The three girls looked at the TV together. As soon as the screen lit up, it showed a scene of a few Firefly executives walking through the crowd of reporters and entering Disney's headquarters. At 9:00 this morning, the chairman of Firefly Films, Eric Williams, officially signed a transaction contract with Disney shareholders. Firefly Films will buy Disney films for $6 billion in cash and assume Disney's debt of $2 billion at the same time. This is the largest transaction in Hollywood history. The amount involved is as high as $6 billion. At the same time, Eric Williams, who is only 20 years old, has become one of the youngest tycoons in Hollywood history. According to related sources, after this acquisition, Firefly Films' market value will reach $9 billion and become the second largest film company in Hollywood, second only to Time Warner. Although Firefly Films didn't disclose its ownership structure to the public, Eric Williams' net worth is conservatively estimated to be more than $5 billion. Let's review the miraculous rise of this young tycoon. Tisk, only $5 billion. That's too conservative. Drew curled her lips in disdain and changed the TV channel. The screen cut to a studio. Eric's figure was still in the background of the studio. The host and guests were endlessly analyzing the various effects of Firefly's acquisition of Disney. Obviously, the analysis of the two experts was too professional. The girl couldn't understand and immediately changed the channel. I remember the black skies, the lightning all around me. In the familiar accompaniment, the sound of the single new DVD that Eric released was heard. The three women were almost attracted to the screen at the same time. In the exciting song, a large number of images of Eric appeared on the screen, including the only film Eric acted in, Back to 17, the rare set photos of Home Alone, the classic scenes in the movies he directed, etc. It was almost equivalent to a review of Eric's career over the past few years. Unknowingly, the song quickly finished playing, and the scene changed to another studio. A blonde female host with an infatuated look on her face kept talking about Eric's legendary experience. Drew, who was still thinking about the song just now, couldn't help but sigh. It's been 4 years in the blink of an eye. It's only been 4 years. Claudia's eyes were also sparkling with admiration. Tina Fey could not help but recall herself 4 years ago. At that time, she had just turned 18 and graduated from high school. Due to her low SAT score, she had no choice but to choose a 2-year community college. She was depressed all the time, complaining that she did not work hard enough and that she was born at the wrong time. At that time, he had just turned 18 and had never gone to any college. However, he was like an alien star that suddenly broke into the sky and became brighter and brighter. Thinking about this, Tina Fey's emotions became even more scattered. Chapter 442. Tina Fey got up and said goodbye to Drew and Claudia after having a simple breakfast. Although she was very tempted by Drew's invitation, she did not forget about her job. She was supposed to send the news about the acquisition back to Philadelphia last night, but she did not receive any information until now. She could imagine the chief editor's mad face. Drew sent a car to send her back to the hotel in Burbank. The car passed through Malibu City and drove steadily on the Pacific Rim Highway. Tina Fey only seemed to have woken up when she looked at the blue sea outside the car window. She opened her satchel and took out a camera from it. She fiddled with it thoughtfully. It was not a new camera, but it was definitely not the one she brought from the news agency. She remembered very clearly that there was a slight scratch on the original camera, but there was none on this one. However, if one was not very observant, one would not be able to tell the difference between the two. She could imagine that the camera she fell yesterday must have been broken. Eric had prepared another one for her, but he did not simply get someone to buy a new one for her to take care of her pride. Tina Fey could not help but smile faintly. No wonder this man could attract so many women. Other than being a little violent, he was flawless in every other aspect. Not only did she not hate him at all, she could not help but excuse him. She thought to herself, he's already so perfect. If he doesn't have any little quirks, how are other people going to live? Tina Fey walked to the hotel she was staying at after saying goodbye to the driver politely. She was stopped by the hotel's receptionist just as she stepped into the lobby. "May I know if you're Miss Tina Fey?" "Yes." Tina Fey nodded. "That's great. You're finally back. We've received 11 calls since yesterday afternoon. All of them were from a Mr. Simon Patrick. He wants you to call him back as soon as possible." "Got it." Tina Fey took the note from the receptionist and hurried to her room. Simon Patrick was the editor-in-chief of the Philadelphia Evening News. He was an old man in his 50s. After returning to her room, Tina Fey called the office of the chief editor of the news agency immediately. Hearing her voice, the person on the other end of the line scolded her. Tina Fey frowned in disgust, but she had no choice but to patiently explain what happened yesterday in detail. Simon's attitude on the other end of the phone suddenly took a 180-degree turn when he heard that she had gotten an exclusive interview with Eric. He gently praised her and told her to write the interview draft and fax it back as soon as possible. Tina Fey hung up the phone and sighed softly. There was a live broadcast of the scene where she was knocked down last night. Even if Simon Patrick did not see it, there were so many employees in the newspaper company. Someone must have seen it, but none of them told Simon about it. It was obvious that many people hoped that she would screw up this mission. The scale of the Philadelphia Evening News was not considered big, and there were not many opportunities for business trips. Many people were looking forward to getting the opportunity to come to Los Angeles to interview about the acquisition. This was basically equivalent to a trip on public expense. The headquarters of Hollywood was still very attractive to Americans. Compared to many people, her experience in the news agency was very shallow. She was able to get this opportunity because, on one hand, her results in the past 2 years were quite outstanding. On the other hand, it was because she was beautiful enough that Simon Patrick, who was lusting after her, gave this opportunity to her. She also knew that Simon Patrick was just an old man who had evil intentions but no guts. Therefore, she did not have any qualms about accepting this mission in the face of the other party's goodwill. She originally thought that as long as she could complete this interview mission well, nobody would say anything about it. Now that she thought about it, she felt that she was still too naive. If she had only received Eric's invitation to attend the celebration party last night without taking the opportunity to get an exclusive interview with Eric, then she would have definitely messed up this mission. At that time, unless she was willing to let that old man take advantage of her, she could only leave the news agency with her tail between her legs. Tina Fey could not help but think of Drew's invitation again. Perhaps, coming to Hollywood was also a good opportunity. Staying in the news agency, she could imagine her future, scheming against her colleagues, playing some small tricks, climbing up step by step. If she was lucky, she might be able to become the chief editor of a news agency when she reached Simon Patrick's age. Or maybe after a few years, she would quit her job after getting married and be a mediocre housewife for the rest of her life. These did not seem to be what she wanted. She hoped that she could have a more colorful life. Looking at the phone in front of her, Tina Fey hesitated for a few seconds. She found the contact information that Drew had left her from her bag and dialed the number in the manner. Drew hung up the phone and walked back to the side of the short table to sit down. Claudia looked at the script of Disguised Hero in front of her, leaned forward slightly and asked curiously. She agreed. Drew nodded and reached out to take a sip of the juice on his left. Yeah, it's so troublesome. She had to go back before calling to say that she agreed. She's not straightforward at all. This is a big deal after all. When I received the invitation from the modeling agency, my father was like facing a great enemy. I pestered him for a long time before he finally agreed, Claudia said, but her eyes drifted to Drew's left hand that was holding the glass. There was a rose gold ring on the ring finger of her little hand. There was a shiny heart-shaped red diamond inlaid on the ring. It shone charmingly under the sunlight that penetrated through the glass wall, making Claudia's heart skip a beat. She remembered that Drew did not have this a few days ago. She could not help but ask, "Hey, Drew, I've always wanted to ask you." Claudia could not help but point to the ring. "Where did you buy this?" Drew put down the juice and waved his hand in front of Claudia proudly. "Isn't it beautiful?" "Of course, the pattern on it is very strange too." "Can I have a look?" Claudia asked with a smile. Drew took it down carefully and passed it to Claudia. He said with a smile, "This can't be bought. If you work hard, someone might give you one." Claudia raised her beautiful eyebrows and seemed to have understood something. She asked, "Eric gave it to me?" Drew nodded. Claudia carefully admired the ring in her hand. The heart-shaped red diamond was perfectly inlaid in light pink rose gold. There were beautiful irregular patterns engraved on both sides, and on the other side of the diamond, there was a small letter K engraved. "Drew, what does this letter K mean?" Drew pursed his lips and silently criticized Eric's bad taste. He said, "I can't tell you this. Maybe you'll find out in the future." Claudia thought that it was a little secret between Drew and Eric, so she did not pursue it. She asked, "Then what about these patterns? They look strange, but are very beautiful." "Oh, this." Drew looked at Claudia's bright red lips and said, "Give me your lipstick. I'll show it to you." Claudia was a little puzzled, but she still took out a Revlon lipstick from her bag and passed it to Drew along with the ring. Drew took it and took out a piece of tissue paper from the box beside him. He carefully folded it, then carefully applied the lipstick on the outside of the ring and slowly imprinted it on the tissue paper. After he was done, Drew pushed the tissue paper in front of Claudia. Claudia picked it up and looked at it. At first, she was a little puzzled, but soon she realized that the pattern in front of her seemed to be a string of flowery English letters. She carefully identified it before reading it out. Eric Williams. Wow, this is Eric's name. Drew nodded. He carefully wiped the ring clean and put it on the ring finger of his left hand. He smiled and said, "So, even if you like it, you can't buy it. This ring will definitely not appear on the market." Claudia showed a look of disdain. She waved her hand and smiled. "I won't wear that guy's name on my finger." "Hey, you seem to be wearing the wrong finger." "That's the ring finger." "Of course it's not wrong," Drew said with a little regret. "It's just a pity that you can't wear it in public." Claudia nodded. She looked down thoughtfully and continued reading the script. She thought about the letter K just now and wondered if there would be other letters like A, B, C, D. Although Drew's gaze was on the information in front of him, he couldn't help but think of the first time he saw this little thing on his finger. God, he actually made a total of 54 rings, a complete deck of cards. It's really despicable. What's even more despicable is that Eric hid the big and small kings and only gave her the K of hearts. He even said that he would take the big and small kings out as wedding rings when he couldn't take it anymore. So far, other than the K of hearts, the other rings had also landed in the hands of the other women. Drew only knew that Julia received the 4 of hearts, but he didn't know about the other women. "When I first saw you, I felt that you would definitely make a name for yourself in Hollywood. I've always wanted you to come to Disney, but I didn't expect it to be like this." In the office at Disney's headquarters, Michael Eisner had a bitter smile on his face. He rubbed the $30 million check in front of him with his fingers. Michael Eisner wanted to make his tone sound more free and easy, but when he thought of Barry Diller's $129 million salary when he left Fox, compared to his current situation, he couldn't be free and easy. As Barry Diller's former deputy, he admitted that he was indeed not as good as Barry Diller. However, Disney's development over the years wasn't worse than 20th Century Fox. The two of them left almost at the same time. Barry Diller took away $129 million, while he only received $30 million. People always say that Hollywood is a place where dreams are made, but they don't understand that this dream factory is actually very cruel. You can realize many people's dreams, but you often can't realize your own. Eric thought of a report about Barry Diller that he had seen in his previous life and said with some emotion. Although the storm 2 years ago made the relationship between the two irreconcilable, he didn't have much ill feelings toward Michael Eisner. The competition in business was cruel, and there was nothing wrong with using any means. If you were too gentle, the result would only be that you would be swallowed up by others. Michael Eisner didn't know where Eric's emotion came from, but there was a faint resonance in his heart. He looked up at Eric sitting opposite him and said, "Who do you plan to replace me next, Frank?" "Frank is too conservative. I hope the new CEO of Disney is a person full of passion." Michael Eisner looked at Eric and said, "Then it must be Jeffrey." Eric just smiled. He hadn't talked to Katzenberg yet, but since Barry Diller had personally recommended Katzenberg to him, Eric had basically made up his mind. Michael Eisner put away the check and opened his mouth to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Although he had brought Katzenberg from Paramount and personally promoted him to the position of president of Disney Animation Studio, the bad relationship between the two of them over the years was well known in Hollywood. Therefore, any evaluation he made of Katzenberg would probably lead Eric to think otherwise. "In that case, I'll take my leave." Michael Eisner stood up and said. Eric also stood up and sent Michael Eisner out of the office. While waiting for the elevator, Michael Eisner suddenly said to Eric, "By the way, there's something I'd better tell you." Eric showed a curious look. Michael Eisner said, "I've received an invitation from Matsushita Financial Group to take over Universal Pictures." Eric raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but say, "Don't they know about the conflict between you and Spielberg?" Since his debut, Spielberg had always maintained a good relationship with Universal Pictures. It was said that Spielberg still owed Universal 7 film contracts. Because of the interest disputes over the cooperation of several films such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the relationship between Michael Eisner and Spielberg was very unpleasant. In the past few years, Spielberg's Abe films had no more cooperation with Disney. Compared to Michael Eisner, Eric felt that Spielberg was more important to Universal. Although the recent box office of Captain Hawk was not satisfactory, Spielberg's position in Hollywood was not so easily shaken. Even without Jurassic Park, Eric believed that Spielberg could develop other film series. If the Japanese let Michael Eisner be the CEO of Universal Pictures, it would definitely affect the cooperation between Spielberg and Universal. The elevator came up and Michael Eisner walked in. Eric thought for a while and followed. "This failure may not be a bad thing for me." Michael Eisner looked at the flashing elevator indicator and said, "I did make a lot of wrong decisions in the past few years, including the strategy against Spielberg. After I go to Universal, I will personally come forward to ease the relationship with Spielberg, and I will definitely not make these mistakes again. So, Eric, be careful. I will not lose to you again next time." "I'll wait and see," Eric said with a smile. Chapter 443. In the following 2 weeks, with the assistance of Morgan Stanley's acquisition team, Firefly successfully completed the buyback of Disney's shares. On February 5, 1992, Disney officially announced its privatization and became a wholly owned subsidiary of Firefly Pictures. During this period, Universal Pictures, which was controlled by the Matsushita Consortium of Japan, signed an agreement with Michael Eisner, who had just resigned from Disney, appointing Michael Eisner as the CEO of Universal Pictures. The former head of Universal Pictures, Sid Simberg, was fired and left the position of the head of Universal Pictures in a sorry state. Sid Simberg had been in control of Universal Pictures for nearly 20 years. His power was deeply rooted in Universal Pictures and he had discovered a large number of famous filmmakers such as Spielberg. The Matsushita Consortium of Japan was the same as Sony. Because they were worried about the backlash of the American people, in the 2 years after the acquisition in 1990, the extent of their power was even greater than Sony's to Columbia. Matsushita basically did not participate in any of Universal Pictures' decisions. Although Sid Simberg was not like Columbia's Peter Guber, who only cared about himself and did not care about managing the film company, as a businessman, Universal Pictures' performance in the past 2 years not only did not improve, but showed signs of a sharp decline. Sid Simberg, on the other hand, used Universal's resources to make a lot of profits. The senior executives of Matsushita realized that if this continued, the acquisition of Universal Pictures would be their biggest failure. In order to prevent the situation from worsening, Matsushita took advantage of Michael Eisner's resignation from Disney and began to make substantial changes to Universal's management. Because of Sid Simberg's deep-rooted influence, Michael Eisner's process of taking office was not easy at all. Under internal and external pressure, Michael Eisner made a large number of personnel changes at Universal in a short period of time. Michael Eisner has been in office for a week, and 14 senior executives of Universal Pictures have been fired. Eric pushed a newspaper in front of Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had just walked into the office. Anyone who knew Katzenberg knew that he was a very arrogant person. However, at this time, Katzenberg was sitting opposite Eric with a smile on his face. At least on the surface, he looked respectful. After taking the newspaper from Eric and quickly skimming through the news, Katzenberg said, "This is necessary. Many of Universal's senior executives have followed Sid Simberg for more than 10 years. If Michael doesn't do this, in less than half a year, he will have to leave Universal the same way he came, and Panasonic will have to invite Sid Simberg back." Eric held a pen and wrote and drew on the draft paper in front of him as if nothing had happened. He asked casually, "There are now many people promoted by Michael in Disney. What do you think I should do? Although Eric asked casually, Katzenberg perked up. For more than half a month, the position of CEO of Disney had been vacant. Many people were guessing who the next CEO of Disney would be. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said that Eric would personally take over as CEO of Disney, while others said that the successor would be the current president of Disney, Frank Wales. There were even rumors that Firefly would appoint Walt Disney's nephew, Roy Disney, as the new CEO. However, Katzenberg had received some hints from Barry Diller early on. During this time, he had been quietly making the relevant preparations and did not jump up and down like some people. The biggest problem facing Disney at present was that at the beginning of the acquisition, Disney's management had passed the Golden Parachute plan with a total compensation of up to $500 million. This meant that within 2 years, Firefly could not make too many changes to Disney's senior executives. Eric, Disney's situation is very different from Universal's. Universal has been run by Sid Simberg for 20 years. It's completely solid. At the same time, Sid Simberg was once a major shareholder of Universal. If Panasonic touches Sid Simberg, it's tantamount to touching the interests of many people at Universal. But Disney is different. Michael did personally promote a lot of people, but Disney is not his world alone. In addition, all of Michael's attention is now focused on Universal. He won't spare too much time to make trouble for Disney. As long as we move forward according to Disney's established development track, there won't be any problems. I think even if some people can't help but want to make trouble, Firefly can still afford 1 or 2 people's severance compensation, right? Eric looked at Katzenberg, who was speaking with confidence, and asked with a smile, "You know?" Katzenberg was slightly taken aback. He nodded a little awkwardly and said, "Barry gave me some hints." "In that case, a lot of things can be explained." Eric put down the pen in his hand, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. "The reason why I'm talking to you now is that I've been a little hesitant. I don't know if handing Disney over to you will become a disaster." Katzenberg shook his head confidently and said, "I promise it won't." "Jeffrey, this kind of promise has no effect. There is no problem with your personal workability. Over the years, of the 11 films you have produced, 9 of them have turned a profit. This is absolutely a miracle in Hollywood. And Barry personally recommended you to me, but, well, do you know what your problem is?" Katzenberg's lips moved, but Eric did not force him to say it. He continued, "I heard that you forced the studio employees to hold meetings at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning more than once. As a result, many people showed up in their pajamas to protest. Moreover, your relationship with Roy Disney of the Disney family is also very bad. If you were only in charge of the production department, this situation would not have much impact. But if you are the CEO of Disney, I can't imagine what kind of terrible consequences it will cause if all the employees don't like your style of doing things." "I can change, Eric. Give me 3 months," Katzenberg said without hesitation. Eric raised his eyebrows and asked, "3 months?" Katzenberg nodded again and said, "Only 3 months. If I can't change within 3 months, then I will leave." Eric looked at Katzenberg's expression and was almost relieved. For a person with extremely strong self-control, since he said such a thing, it might take less than 3 months for Katzenberg to change. Eric stretched out 3 fingers and said, "Okay, 3 months it is, but I still want to remind you that except for the 30 million yuan compensation from Michael, Firefly will not pay a penny for the Golden Parachute agreement. This is also a test for you. You need to get along with the old people left by Michael, and you must not affect Disney's operations. Otherwise, you will fail." Katzenberg hesitated for a moment, but he quickly nodded. Eric smiled with satisfaction and said, "We will talk about your salary later. Now, you can tell me your thoughts. Since Barry has already revealed the news to you, I think you must have made the relevant preparations, right?" Katzenberg said concisely, "I want Pixar." After the success of Toy Story, all the film companies in Hollywood basically saw the potential of 3D animated films. Since the release of Toy Story, Pixar had faced several headhunting frenzies. Even John Lasseter was contacted. Fortunately, Eric took appropriate measures and Pixar did not suffer any losses. Before Toy Story, animated films had always been monopolized by Disney. Since Disney was acquired by Firefly, it was normal for Katzenberg to propose this condition in order to maintain the original monopoly. Eric said, "You don't have to. Starting from the next animated film, all of Pixar's works will be distributed by Disney. At the same time, the brand management and derivative development of Pixar's animation will be operated by Disney." Eric, I have read some information about Pixar. Don't you think that Pixar's efficiency is too low? One animated film every 2 years is indeed a little low, but Pixar is taking the high-quality route. Moreover, as the president of Disney, you should know that animated films can't be fast even if you want to. But at least one animated film a year shouldn't be a problem, right? Computer production is much faster than manual production, right? Eric remembered that in the original space-time, DreamWorks Animation, founded by Katzenberg, was famous for its high production output. However, except for Shrek, DreamWorks Animation did not produce many high-quality films. This might be the result of focusing too much on quantity. Jeffrey, isn't Disney's animation studio also producing animation? The two studios combined can be said to produce one film a year on average. By the way, speaking of Disney's animation studio, I think you must have seen the potential of computer animation, so I hope to use 3 years to digitize all the original hand-drawn animation of Disney's animation studio. You mean to fully convert to 3D animation production, but now Disney has 600 hand-drawn animators. If there is a reform, these people... Eric shrugged. Jeffrey, if any industry can't follow the trend, it can only face elimination. I gave them 3 years, which is already very generous. They have enough time to receive training. If in the end, they still can't adapt, then I can only say that it's a pity. In the original space-time, the success of Toy Story directly announced the decline of Disney's hand-drawn animation. Other than The Lion King, Disney had never produced another 2D hand-drawn animation film that made it to the box office rankings. Okay, I will arrange it. Katzenberg nodded and promised. After this conversation, Eric quickly announced the appointment of Katzenberg. Although this appointment made many people dissatisfied, compared to the turmoil caused by Michael Eisner's departure to Global, Disney was generally calm. Many people were worried that Katzenberg would do things according to his original style after taking over as Disney's CEO. They were even prepared to resign in the face of high pressure. However, in less than a week, Disney's employees found that Katzenberg's management style had changed a lot. He was no longer so unscrupulous and did things his own way. He even said, "Thank you." This was a shocking thing. This was because Katzenberg never said, "thank you," to people at work. In his own words, it was not that he did not know how to be polite, but he did not want to waste time. After appointing a new CEO, Eric finally relaxed a little. He did not have to put too much energy into Disney. Although the acquisition had been completed, it would take at least half a year for the remaining affairs to be handed over and integrated. These things were still the responsibility of the Morgan Stanley team. For this professional acquisition team, Eric was not only relieved, but he even coveted it. Unfortunately, Firefly Investment could not afford such a team now. Not only can we not afford it, but we also don't need it, Chris said while eating dinner in the restaurant of the Pointy Corner Manor. After completing this acquisition, Chris would also return to New York. Eric specially sent Chris off at the Pointy Corner Manor. In addition to Chris' girlfriend, Emily Brighton, also appeared at the scene because she was in Los Angeles for business. I'm just saying. Although we can't afford it now, we will definitely need it sooner or later, Eric retorted. Chris smiled and said, "Maybe, Eric. What are you going to do next? Our funds are less than $1.5 billion. It is not enough to pay off the debts left by Disney. Moreover, I don't recommend you to pay off the debts. In the process of business operation, an appropriate amount of debt is necessary. Compared to the current market value of Firefly, $2 billion is only equivalent to about 25% of the debt ratio. This is the lowest among the 7 major Hollywood film companies." Eric thought for a while and said, "Actually, I have also considered it. Since we can't pay off the debts, then we can invest. Sigh, It's just a pity that the Soviet Union collapsed last year and we didn't take the opportunity to make a fortune. Don't even think about it. The Soviet Union is a piece of fat meat that we can't touch. This is a global plunder. In order to prevent the possible recovery of the Soviet Union, the European and American countries behind this event were collectively manipulated, Chris said. When he thought of the huge profits brought by the depreciation of the ruble, he couldn't help but gulp. He took a sip of the red wine in front of him and continued, "In just half a year, the ruble depreciated by 110,000 times. The nearly $28 trillion of wealth that the Soviet Union accumulated over 80 years was plundered by just a few $100 million. Just thinking about it makes me excited." Sitting next to Eric, Jennifer Connolly, who had been quietly acting like a lady, couldn't help but ask, "Hey, what are you guys talking about? Why don't I understand?" Chris looked at the beautiful woman sitting opposite him. Although his girlfriend was next to him, he couldn't help but show off. "We are talking about the largest collective robbery in human history." Chapter 444. No one would believe that the ruble crisis was an accident. Ever since Gorbachev started to reform the Soviet Union's economy, the ruble crisis had already started. At the end of the 1980s, the Soviet Union opened its financial market to the West without any precautions. Almost instantly, a large number of foreign banks, investment companies, and even insurance companies swarmed into the major cities of the Soviet Union. They used high interest rates to absorb more rubles from the Soviet Union citizens and enterprises than the Soviet Union's local banks. At the same time, the Soviet Union started to privatize state-owned enterprises. A large number of state-owned enterprises were distributed to the Soviet Union citizens in the form of shares and bonds. Compared to intangible shares and bonds, the ordinary people undoubtedly preferred to see real money. Therefore, the Western investment companies began to use the rubles they absorbed from the Soviets to buy the shares of their state-owned enterprises. When a large number of Soviet state-owned enterprises were in the hands of the Westerners, the final blow came. In the second half of 1991, the North American and European countries began to speak ill of the Soviet Union's economy. For a time, the newspapers and media were filled with negative news such as, "The Soviet Union's reform will inevitably lead to destruction," "The Soviet Union's economy is about to collapse," "The market value of rubles is seriously overvalued," "The ruble needs to be repriced," and other negative news. When everyone said the same thing, even the most determined people would be shaken. Therefore, the fear of the collapse of the Soviet Union's economy and the sharp depreciation of the ruble quickly spread among all classes of the Soviet Union. Dumping, bank runs, hoarding, panic buying. Under the control of the Western countries, a series of irrational and blind actions in the Soviet Union dragged the ruble, which was already on the verge of collapse, into the abyss. In just a few months, the exchange rate between the ruble and the US dollar fell from 1 to 2 to 112,000 to $1 like an avalanche. In the history of mankind, even during the most tragic period of war, there had never been such an alarming inflation. The rubles in the hands of the Soviet Union almost became a pile of worthless waste paper. As everyone knew, a country's currency was usually supported by its own gold reserves. Under the situation of the ruble's rapid decline, the Soviet Union began to use its own gold reserves in an attempt to directly sell gold to solve the country's economic crisis. At the same time, the most serious international gold price crash of the 20th century, timely, happened. After the collapse of the gold price, the Soviet Union wanted to export gold for cash, but they could not find any buyers. The collapse of the gold price was the last straw that overwhelmed the Soviet Union. On December 25, 1991, Soviet President Gorbachev admitted that the economic reform had completely failed. He signed several presidential decrees in succession, declaring the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The only superpower in the world that could compete with the United States was annihilated at this moment. Chris was very eloquent. He described this world-class game in a thrilling way. Emily, who was sitting beside him, couldn't help but put down her cutlery as she listened. She looked at her boyfriend with admiration, while Connolly's eyes widened. "So, all the wealth of the Soviet Union has been snatched by us?" Connolly asked curiously after Chris finished speaking. Chris shook his head. "Of course not. This is not a zero-sum game where the winner and loser are equal, but a wealth evaporation. The wealth accumulated by the Soviet Union for more than half a century is like a pot of boiling water heated by a fierce fire. The water in the pot evaporates, and the speculators only get some dew condensed on the lid of the pot. Connolly imagined the scene described by Chris and clicked his tongue. That's really wasteful. Emily, who was sitting beside Chris, interjected at this time, I think the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a good thing. At least we don't have to face the threat of a nuclear war. Eric nodded. Yeah, the Big Ivan, that blew up the entire Arctic Circle, scared the world. If a nuclear war broke out, the Soviet Union only needed to throw a few Big Ivan-level nuclear bombs to the east and west coasts, and everything would be over. Eric, what is Big Ivan? Connolly asked curiously. The four of them were all born around the 1970s. Except for Eric, the other three showed a puzzled look. Eric had only seen the relevant information when he was browsing the internet in his previous life. He said, in 1961, the Soviet Union threw a 58-megaton TNT nuclear bomb into the Arctic Circle. We weren't born at that time, so you may not know. Seeing that the three of them had no idea what a 58-megaton nuclear bomb was, Eric thought for a moment and said, let me make a comparison, and you will know how terrifying Big Ivan is. After the Big Ivan nuclear bomb was dropped, the plane that dropped the bomb flew 250 kilometers away at a subsonic speed before the nuclear bomb exploded, but it was still shaken by the shock wave after the nuclear bomb exploded, and the plane was almost destroyed. Conversion, the nuclear bomb affected an area of 200,000 square kilometers, almost the size of 2 New York states. On the other hand, the little boy that exploded in Hiroshima in 1945 only had a yield of 13,000 tons, but the high temperature at the moment of explosion directly vaporized 70,000 people, and the subsequent death toll exceeded 200,000. The power of Big Ivan was 5,000 times that of Little Boy. It is said that the Soviet Union later developed a 100-megaton TNT nuclear bomb, but because they couldn't find a wide enough nuclear test site, they didn't detonate it. When Chris and the other two heard Eric's words, they all showed a faint look of fear. Eric lowered his head and gently picked up a piece of sausage, put it in his mouth, and said softly, So, I even think that anyone who builds a nuclear bomb should be convicted of crimes against humanity. Emily smiled and said, Eric, actually, Einstein himself is very regretful that he indirectly invented the nuclear bomb. But he is still guilty, Eric said. Chris also laughed. Eric, you really sound like an extreme anti-war person. I am. Compared to war, I am more inclined to settle disputes between those in power by dueling. Bare hands, cold weapons, or revolvers are fine, as long as there is no war. This time, the other three laughed, and Eric laughed as well. Ha, this is a joke. This is for you. After lunch, the two women were cleaning up in the kitchen. Eric brought Chris to the study and handed an Apple PowerBook 140 to Chris. This thing is not easy to use at all. It's better to write by hand, Chris said as she took it and fiddled with it. Eric said, I'm not letting you use it for work. I just want you to study it. You know, at the beginning of the year, IBM and several other computer software and hardware companies together established SNSNet. This will be the focus of our development in the future. The traditional industries in the United States have been divided up by various forces. It is basically impossible for Firefly to get involved. The high-tech industry related to computers is still an undeveloped area. Think about it, in the 1980s, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and Larry Ellison all became billionaires. I am sure that the development of computer technology will not stop there. There will be more opportunities in the future. Chris finally clumsily opened the laptop in her hand. When she heard Eric's words, Chris did not refute. Eric had brought her too many surprises, which made her have a kind of blind confidence in Eric. Then I will go back and take some time to study it. What's next? Do you have any plans? Eric remembered that the internet developed rapidly after Bill Clinton came to power because of the support of the U.S. policy. Eric said, Not yet. It's still a bit early, at least until next year. However, you can take some time to pay attention to this year's presidential candidate, Bill Clinton. He proposed an information superhighway plan. This is why I just mentioned SNSNet. This network is likely to be the main carrier of the information superhighway. You can find some relevant information and give it to the management of Cisco and let them study SNSNet. It will definitely be useful. In the original spacetime, SNSNet was the predecessor of the Internet. Chris silently wrote down the keywords Bill Clinton and the information superhighway and said, "If there is nothing else, I will go back to New York. Also, you'd better find a few assistants for my father. After all, he is a bit old, and he is not like those energetic old men like Lei Sherdong and Rupert Murdoch." Eric laughed and said, "Of course, you don't have to worry about that. However, he definitely doesn't want to hear you say that about him." Chris shrugged and said, "No old man would like to hear that, but it is the truth." Chris and Emily were going back to New York by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Eric chatted with Chris for a while and then saw them off. "I've made an appointment with Jeffrey Katzenberg to take a look at Disney's production base. Do you want to come with me?" Eric asked Jennifer Connelly after sending the two of them off. Connelly shook her head and said, "No, I just finished filming. I am too lazy to move. I will rest in the villa. Come back early tonight." Although Fox's Anti-Condor 2 had failed last summer, because of her relationship with Eric, as the female lead, Connelly, of course, would not be affected too much. She quickly took on another comedy, which was expected to be released during Easter this year. Of course, Eric did not ask about this movie. He was too busy with his own affairs, and of course, he was too lazy to earn that little extra money. Eric looked at Connelly's delicate face and said, "Then you can stay at home. Drew, that little girl, recently bought 2 more cars, which are very suitable for women to drive. If you want to go shopping, you can go to the garage and drive one." "Okay." Connelly heard Eric casually mention Drew's appearance, and she felt a little jealous, but she did not show it. Of course, Eric also noticed this small detail, but he didn't care too much about it. He didn't have high expectations for his women, and he didn't even dream of living in harmony with them. As long as his women could live in harmony, it was a good thing. After Michael Eisner took over Disney, after more than 7 years of development, Disney had completely broken through the original model of making profits from animated films. Now, Disney not only had Disney Studios, which produced all-ages films and animations, but also Touchstone Pictures, which produced PG-rated films and above. In addition, Disney also had its own children's TV program, but the scale was small and the sales had not been very good. Compared to the Firefly studio in Praia Vista, Disney's production base was smaller, but it was located in the more prosperous Burbank. The story of Aladdin is adapted from a medieval Arabian story about a magic lamp that can grant people's wishes. The story is from the famous page 1001. However, we have made corresponding modifications to the characters in the story, so it will be more suitable for the local American audience. In the office building of Disney's Animation Production Center, Katzenberg accompanied Eric to watch the production of Aladdin. Eric knew that this was one of the most famous Disney animations in the 1990s. After watching it, Eric and Katzenberg went to Katzenberg's former office together. The secretary served them coffee and left. Eric asked, "Besides Aladdin, does the studio have any other animation plans?" "Of course, there are many. In the past, during every week's meeting, I would ask each supervisor to provide 5 animation ideas. After accumulating them, we have confirmed that there are 5 or 6 projects in the project preparation period." Eric asked, "You remember all these, right? Tell me about them." Katzenberg felt that Eric's reaction was a little strange, so he said, "Why don't I get someone to bring the proposal for you to take a look? Everyone knows that you have good taste." "That would be best." Soon, the secretary of the studio sent over a stack of project proposals. Eric patiently flipped through them one by one and soon found what he wanted. It was an African prairie story that imitated The Revenge of the Prince. It was the prototype of The Lion King. In the original spacetime, The Lion King was not only the last glory of Disney's 2D hand-drawn animation, but it was also Disney's most successful 2D hand-drawn animation film. The box office revenue of the film alone was close to $1 billion worldwide. Calmly, he took out the script of The Lion King and handed it to Katzenberg. "Have you discussed this?" Katzenberg took a look and said, "This story was proposed by Brenda Chapman. It imitates The Revenge of the Prince." At first, I thought it was a little old-fashioned, but after they came up with some character designs, I agreed because the character designs are very likable. However, it hasn't been launched yet. If you like it, it can be placed after Aladdin is completed. Eric didn't show too much eagerness. After all, it was meat in the pot, and it couldn't run away from eating it sooner or later. "I think this story is good. Ask them to make a detailed proposal for me. If it's good, raise this project to the highest priority." Katzenberg nodded and called his secretary over to give a few instructions. Then, he said to Eric, let's go to the TV production department to take a look. They have recently made a lot of changes to the classic Mickey Mouse Club and replaced a group of small actors. Chapter 445. In the original spacetime, Disney's best television media asset was the Entertainment and Sports Network, ESPN. ABC was ranked second and had even become a burden to the Disney Corporation. As for the Disney Children's Channel, due to its limited audience, it didn't perform well. After Michael Eisner came to power in 1984, he had been focusing on the development of the film industry. Before he had time to pay attention to the television industry, Disney was acquired by Firefly. Eric and Katzenberg came to the production center of the Disney Children's Channel. To be honest, he wasn't very interested in the Disney Children's Channel. If he hadn't heard the name of the Mickey Mouse Club from Katzenberg, Eric wouldn't have come to waste his time. A production manager named Owen Mott from the Disney Children's Channel cautiously showed the two of them around the production center. He felt a little guilty. Eric hadn't visited any of the many departments at Disney, but he had come here. The Children's Channel hadn't made much progress in nearly 10 years. Owen Mott was very worried that Eric would reform this department first. Owen Mott led Eric and Katzenberg past the studio and introduced, "Mr. Williams, this is the recording site of the Mickey Mouse Club. Do you want to go in and take a look?" Eric, who was a little absent-minded, immediately perked up. Of course. Owen Mott, who had been observing Eric, saw that he was interested and hurriedly led the two of them into the studio. The Mickey Mouse Club started broadcasting in January. There are 5 days a week, and each day has a theme. They are Music Day, Comedy Day, Surprise Day, Party Day, and Guest Day. Each episode is an hour long. Owen Mott gave a simple introduction. When the three of them arrived at the studio, they saw 6 or 7 boys and girls, who were about 11 or 12 years old, rehearsing a short play on the stage. Noticing the three of them coming in, the program team's person in charge announced a break and quickly walked over. "Hello, Mr. Williams. I'm the director of the Mickey Mouse Club. My name is Billy Clark." The middle-aged man named Billy Clark, who was in his 40s, shook Eric's hand before greeting Katzenberg and Owen Mott. At the same time, he gave Owen Mott an inquiring look. "I'm just here to take a look. You guys can continue," Eric explained. Billy Clark smiled and said, "We're rehearsing for tomorrow's recording. Mr. Williams, would you like to take a look?" "All right." Eric nodded and walked to the audience stands with Katzenberg and Owen Mott. Due to the rehearsal, the audience stands were empty. On the stage, the curious teenagers were whispering to each other. "Hey, look, that's Eric Williams," a brown-haired girl with neat bangs said. "Could it be that he wants to shoot a movie and is here to choose some small actors?" The person who answered was a blonde girl with wavy hair. As she said that, she subconsciously adjusted her hair. The other two boys came to the girl's side and echoed, "It's very possible. If that's the case, that would be great. I heard that Stuart Runkle's salary for Home Alone is now more than $10 million. The girl with wavy hair glanced at the boy who spoke and pretended to know everything. She raised her chin and said, "That's impossible. This is just the publicity figure." After all, the reason why Home Alone 3 was stopped last year was because Stuart Runkle's price was too high. Even if it's only 5 million, it's still more than us, the other boy added. The girl with wavy hair nodded subconsciously and looked at the girl with bangs beside her. She thought that she was prettier than her. If Eric was really here to choose small actors, she would definitely have an advantage over her. No, I have to seize this opportunity. The girl with wavy hair reached out to adjust her hair again. She looked at the girl with bangs beside her and thought to herself, no, I have to seize this opportunity. This guy is so stupid. He definitely can't beat me. The 7 teenagers were chatting together when Billy Clark walked to the side of the stage and clapped his hands. Okay, little guys, look who's here. The director of Home Alone. Cheer up and perform the short play again. If you perform well, maybe Mr. Williams will choose you to be the small lead in his next movie. When Eric heard Billy Clark's words and saw the teenagers looking at him, he smiled and waved his hand, giving them a cheering expression. Wow, he's so handsome. I'll definitely find a boyfriend like him when I grow up, the girl with bangs said with a little infatuation. The girl with wavy hair sneered and teased, last time on Scout, didn't you say that boys were too sloppy and you didn't want a boyfriend? That's Eric Williams. How can he be sloppy? The girl with bangs looked below the stage without blinking and retorted. Then, a faint blush appeared on her face and she said excitedly, hey, he's looking at me. Why not me? The girl with wavy hair looked at Eric unhappily and even revealed an obedient smile. He's clearly looking at me, the girl with bangs said firmly. Hey, the two of you, stop chatting. The performance is about to start. The director's assistant pointed at the 2 girls with a script in his hand. The girl with bangs stuck out her tongue cutely and walked backstage. The girl with wavy hair also quickly followed. Eric watched the 7 teenagers go backstage to prepare before retracting his gaze. He had always had a slight case of face blindness. This symptom was even more obvious on Westerners. As for black people, other than Morgan Freeman and a few others who were easier to recognize, he couldn't tell the others apart from them. Among the 7 teenagers just now, there were 4 boys and 3 girls. Eric looked at them and didn't find any familiar feeling. He thought that maybe these Lolas and Shotas were too young, or maybe he had scared someone away again. He patted Billy Clark, who was walking back and sitting down beside him, and said, Billy, can you give me a copy of these children's information? Of course. Billy Clark nodded and called his assistant over. Soon, a stack of information was in Eric's hands. While the stage was still preparing, Eric opened the stack of information. The familiar names of Justin Timberlake, Ryan Gosling, Britney Spears, and Christina Aguilera came into view one after another. Eric was a little surprised that the list in his hand didn't change much at first. But when he saw the little guy's resumes, he understood. These people basically started attending the relevant training when they were 7 or 8 years old. At that time, he hadn't transmigrated yet, so of course, he couldn't change anything. But when the teenagers appeared on stage again, Eric recognized them. Sweetie now had shoulder-length bangs. She was the shortest and the cutest. The girl with curly hair was Christina Aguilera. Commander Gao had a student's haircut, and Justin was a little handsome. The other teenagers' names were unfamiliar. They must have returned to their normal lives after the club was disbanded in his previous life. According to Billy Clark's explanation, Eric learned that the skits that the teenagers were rehearsing were mostly adapted from classic cartoons, movies, or stage plays. They were mainly in the style of comedy. After they were recorded, they would be played on the comedy day of the Mickey Mouse Club. On stage, they were performing an adaptation of Disney's classic cartoon, Forest Prince. Eric had never seen Forest Prince before, so he wasn't interested in such a childish stage play. The only thing he was interested in was the few young actors on stage. The curly-haired Christina was wearing a feather headdress. She was playing the role of the protagonist, Maokri's little friend in the forest village. Britney, on the other hand, was wearing a pair of rabbit ears. It was obvious that she was playing the role of a rabbit. Christina was reciting her lines, trying her best to surpass the silly Britney. But her eyes kept drifting to Eric. She knew that if Eric was really choosing young actors, her only opponent would be Britney because the other girl was black. The deep-rooted racial discrimination in the United States didn't start when one was an adult. It was even more obvious in children who weren't scheming. Christina looked down on the boy and girl in the group and didn't see them as a threat. Perhaps because of this distraction, when Justin Timberlake, who was playing Maokri, recited his lines, Christina suddenly realized that she had forgotten her lines. She hesitated for a full 5 seconds before she remembered her lines. She stuttered a little and at the same time, she had the urge to cry. "It's over. I definitely can't beat that idiot Britney. If I had known, I wouldn't have fought for this role. Wouldn't it be better to play the role of a rabbit? Not only do I have fewer lines, but I also have to act cute." However, Christina's worry was obviously overdone because Eric didn't care too much about it. His eyes were more focused on Britney. Perhaps it was because of the memories from his previous life. Eric couldn't help but imagine Britney taking off her loose rabbit costume and leaving only her ears on her head. Ugh. Christina certainly didn't know what Eric was thinking. She was thinking about how to turn the tables. Soon, an opportunity presented itself. When Britney skipped past her, Christina quickly looked around to make sure that no one was paying attention. Then, she nonchalantly extended her toes. Britney, who had just jumped up, lost her balance and fell on the stage with a plop. "Oh, Boo, why are you so careless?" Christina suppressed the joy in her heart when she saw that Britney had successfully fallen. She quickly went forward to help Britney up and comforted her. With such a small accident, it was impossible for the performance to continue. Billy Clark shouted for a pause, then gave Eric an apologetic look in embarrassment. "Let's see if that girl is all right first." Eric pointed at the stage with a playful look in his eyes and stood up first. Billy Clark and Katzenberg could only follow him to the stage. On the stage, Britney, who was being supported by Christina to sit on a prop box, was still looking at the place where she had fallen. Although there were a few stage props there, she felt that she had been very careful just now. She didn't expect to still trip. "Boo, how are you? Are you all right?" Billy Clark walked to Britney and squatted down beside her. Britney looked at Eric guiltily. She took her right hand out of her rabbit costume and raised her elbow. "I'm fine. I just fell here." Billy Clark saw that there was only a faint patch of red on Britney's elbow and knew that she was fine. He turned to Eric and asked, "Mr. Williams, do you want to continue?" Eric shook his head with a smile. "No, I'll rest for a while. Also, little ones, you did well. Keep up the good work." When Christina heard Eric say that, she thought that he was just brushing her off. She must be very disappointed with their performance. Just as she was feeling a little down, she saw Eric looking at her with a smile. The girl didn't know that Eric had caught her little action because he was focused on Britney. She thought that Eric was looking at her in a new light. This gave her a glimmer of hope. She mustered up her courage and said, "Mr. Williams, can I have your autograph?" Eric raised his eyebrows and said, "Of course, but I don't have a pen." When the staff heard Eric say that, he tactfully handed him a pen. Eric took it, squatted down on the prop box, and signed the notebook that Christina handed him. The other young men also came over to ask for autographs. Britney also wanted an autograph, but she was a little shy. She had just embarrassed herself in front of Eric. She didn't know if he would still be willing to give her an autograph. "How about you?" After Eric signed the last young man's autograph, he raised the pen in his hand at Britney, who was sitting beside him in a daze. Can I, Mr. Williams?" Britney asked nervously. "Of course." Eric nodded with a smile. Britney revealed a cute smile and quickly ran backstage to get her notebook. Eric quickly wrote down a string of blessings on Britney's notebook and signed his name. Christina looked at Eric's additional blessings with jealousy. She thought for a moment and came over to him. "Mr. Williams, I heard that you live in a seaside villa in Malibu?" Eric smiled and nodded with interest. "Yes." "Then, can we be guests there? I heard that a lot of people want to see the seaside villa." After Christina said that, the other young men looked expectant. Britney's eyes also lit up. Freedom City in Malibu's Point Manor had become a building that many people yearned for. Many tourists who came to Los Angeles would even rent a speedboat to see Freedom City from afar. Those who could afford it would even rent a helicopter, but no one dared to fly directly above the Point Manor. Chapter 446. That's all. They'll be there in a while. Eric hung up the phone and said to the boys and girls around him, "Now, you can call your parents. If they agree, you can go to Shop Corner Manor. Someone will take care of you." The boys cheered and left to make the call. Only Christina heard Eric's words and asked, "Mr. Williams, aren't you coming with us?" Eric looked at the precocious girl in front of him. Although Christina wasn't as famous and rich as Brittany in his previous life, compared to Brittany's messy career and life, Christina could be considered a winner in life. "I still have work to do, but I can treat you to dinner tonight." Christina looked disappointed. She hummed softly, unsure if she was faking it. However, the girl then looked at Eric expectantly and smiled sweetly. "Mr. Williams, we'll wait for you to come back. Hurry up and call your parents. If your parents don't agree, you can't go." Although the rehearsal for the day was not over yet, the person in charge of the program did not dare to say anything since the big boss had personally given the order. He even sent a car to send the boys to Malibu. Katzenberg did not comment on Eric's behavior. In his heart, he thought that Eric's behavior was a teenager who wanted to show off. After all, Eric was only a young man in his early 20s, and Katzenberg was already 42 years old. The two of them then visited a few more sets before leaving the Disney Production Center. On the way back to Disney's headquarters, Katzenberg, who was sitting next to Eric, said, "Eric, I got someone to re-edit Righteous Courage. Do you want to watch it again when you're free?" Eric thought of Righteous Courage, which was supposed to be released in early November last year. He shook his head and said, "There's no need to watch it. The biggest problem with this movie is the casting. The male lead, Ron Dean, always gives people an inexplicable sense of acting. In addition, I don't think there's any need for this movie to be released. Let's just release it on video." Katzenberg nodded. Releasing the video could save a lot of publicity costs. However, after thinking about it, he quickly suggested, "After all, it's an investment of nearly $50 million US. Why don't we release it on a small scale in September? The off-season publicity costs will be much lower, and we'll be able to recoup some funds." "That's settled then," Eric said. "Also, we can slightly increase the publicity for Nuns Are Crazy that we just saw. Whoopi Goldberg's comedy performance was very eye-catching in Ghost. This movie might be able to bring some surprises to Disney." Even the conceited Katzenberg did not doubt Eric's judgment in movies. After hearing what Eric said, Katzenberg seriously noted this matter in his memo. After arriving at Disney's headquarters and meeting with several Disney executives for a short meeting, Eric got off work and returned to Malibu. It was already 6:30 when he got home. When Eric walked into the villa, he heard a burst of laughter coming from the kitchen. He walked over and leaned against the doorframe to look inside. 7 or 8 teenagers, including Connolly, were surrounding 2 people dressed as chefs. When they saw Eric appear, the teenagers put down what they were doing and walked towards him. Only then did Eric see clearly that the teenagers were making dumplings. The scene that was very familiar in his memory appeared in this situation, which made him feel a little strange and out of place. After greeting each other, Connolly said, "Eric, I called the chefs from the Chinese restaurant to cook Chinese food for them. Everyone is learning how to make dumplings. It's very interesting." Eric smiled and nodded. He had already realized this from the Chinese faces of the 2 chefs. "You guys continue. I'm going to take a shower first. Jenny, can you help me prepare some clothes?" Eric said as he turned and walked upstairs. Connolly nodded and followed him. Walking side by side with Eric, he asked, "Why did you think of inviting these little guys to your house?" "What's the matter? You don't like it?" Eric asked. Connolly shook his head. The teenagers were very polite and treated him as Eric's girlfriend. Connolly enjoyed the treatment of being the hostess. "I'm just a little curious." After thinking about it, Connolly turned his head and glanced behind him. After making sure that no one was following, he said, "Hey, don't tell me you've taken a fancy to a girl?" Eric laughed and said, "Do you think I'm that kind of person?" Connolly nodded seriously and said, "I heard that when you met Drew, she was only 13 years old. At that time, you already had designs on her." Humph. Eric stretched out his index finger and shook it. He retorted, "You've got it the other way around. It's that girl who had designs on me since she was 13 years old. She's the one who's been planning for a long time." Connolly laughed and punched Eric's shoulder. He said, "Don't quibble. When I was cleaning the house today, I found a book called Lolita." Eric remembered that Drew must have bought it and left it here. She said that she wanted to study the techniques of seducing uncles. However, he did not explain to Connolly. Instead, he joked, "I'm reading that book from a scientific research point of view. Don't misunderstand." Hee. When Eric came out of the shower, Connolly had already returned to the kitchen to help. He picked up a magazine and sat on the sofa near the glass wall to read it. After a while, a small figure came out of the bathroom. She kept shaking off the water droplets on her hands. When she looked up and saw Eric sitting there, she was shocked. "Sorry, Mr. Williams. I didn't know you were here," Brittany said in a panic. Eric pushed the tissue on the coffee table in front of him and said, "Here, use this." Brittany walked over carefully and took out a few tissues from the box to dry her hands. When she saw that Eric was still staring at her, she turned to look in the direction of the kitchen as if she was hoping that someone would come to save her. Eric looked at the little girl's uneasy look and laughed. "Do I look scary?" "No, of course not." Brittany shook her head quickly. Because she had fallen on the stage in front of Eric in the afternoon, the little girl had been a little shy and awkward in front of Eric. Girls usually matured early, not to mention that Brittany had been taking part in all kinds of training and performances since she was 8 years old. She was more mature than her peers who stayed in school. However, the little girl couldn't help but feel a little inferior when she saw the faint smile on Eric's handsome face. "Have a seat and chat with me. There are so many people in the kitchen anyway." "I don't need you," Eric said as he pointed at the sofa opposite him. Brittany sat down across from Eric obediently, but her eyes were lowered the whole time. "Who's in your family?" Eric asked gently as he closed the magazine and pressed it against his knees. "Dad, Mom, brother, and sister," Brittany replied. Eric only remembered that Brittany had a sister and a pair of greedy parents. He didn't really care about Brittany's brother. "Are they all in Los Angeles?" "Yeah. Mom gave birth to my sister last year, so Dad moved to Los Angeles with my brother." Christina finished wrapping another dumpling that looked delicious. She picked it up and showed it to her friends. Then, she suddenly realized that Brittany hadn't returned for a long time. The little girl instinctively became vigilant. Putting down the dumpling in her hand, Christina politely said a few words to Connolly and walked out of the kitchen. She immediately saw Brittany, who was chuckling at Eric's teasing. "Oh no, Brittany, that stupid girl beat me to it." Christina's eyes were filled with jealousy as she thought about it. Eric saw Christina and waved at her. Christina quickly put away her thoughts, smiled sweetly, and walked over briskly. "Chris, we were just talking about you," Brittany said innocently. At the same time, she moved to the side and let Christina sit down beside her. Christina asked a little warily, "About what?" "About us at the Mickey Mouse Club, of course," Brittany replied. Eric looked at the two girls opposite him and said, "Brittany was just talking about your singing. I heard that both of you sing very well. Sing for me when you're free." "Sure," Christina quickly said. "I can do it now." Eric shook his head. "Forget it for today. Dinner is coming soon." Christina had wanted to show off, but hearing Eric say that, she nodded in disappointment. After chatting for a while, Connolly poked his head out of the kitchen and called them to dinner. Brittany's appetite had long been aroused by the unique aroma of Chinese food. She stood up and skipped to the dining room. Eric put the magazine away and was about to stand up. Christina bit her lip and finally mustered her courage. "Mr. Williams, Brittany's singing is actually not as good as mine. The teachers in the club all say so." Eric found it even more interesting. He asked with a smile, "Why are you saying that?" I just wanted to say that Brittany is just a little prettier than me. She can't compare to me in other aspects. I can definitely perform better than her." "Oh, I got it." Eric nodded non-committally. Christina then said, "Mr. Williams, are you going to our club to choose actors today?" Eric raised his eyebrows. He finally understood why the little girl was acting so strangely. He smiled and shook his head. "No, I'm just going to check on the work at Disney Studios today. It has nothing to do with choosing actors." Christina did not look discouraged at all. Instead, she walked over and squatted beside Eric. She asked expectantly, "Mr. Williams, do you think I can be an actress?" "Aren't you an actress now? I mean, a movie actor. Like Stuart Runkle?" Eric recalled the information he had read about Christina today. Christina grew up in a broken family like many American children. When she was 6 years old, her mother finally couldn't stand her father's domestic violence and chose to divorce him. After that, she lived a homeless life. Because she was good at singing, she started to perform on stage at the age of 8 to earn money. Children who grew up in such an environment matured early and were full of desire for a better life. That was why she said what she had just said. The success of Home Alone 3 made Stewart the most successful child actor in the world. This was directly reflected by the $10 million salary. "Chris, don't worry and perform in the Mickey Mouse Club. As long as you work hard, you'll definitely be successful in the future. You don't have to act in a movie," Eric said as he patted the back of Christina's hand. He didn't have the consciousness of a savior. Moreover, with his current status, there was no need for him to support 1 or 2 future superstars to earn merits. Eric was more interested in seeing what would happen to the superstars in his previous life if they deviated from their original life path. Seeing that Eric was about to stand up, Christina grabbed his arm reflexively and begged, "Mr. Williams, can you give me a chance? I heard that you have many girlfriends. I can be your girlfriend too." Seeing the girl's little hand grabbing his tightly, Eric said, "Stop it, Chris. I'm going to get angry if you continue like this." "Don't, Mr. Williams. I know I'm not pretty enough, but I can bring Brittany with me. We can be your girlfriend together," Christina stuttered, but she still said it smoothly. Eric raised his eyebrows again. Christina thought that Eric was moved and was delighted. She continued, "Mr. Williams, Brittany has always liked you, and she's always so silly and easy to coax." Eric almost laughed. Christina's description of Brittany as a silly was quite apartment. In his previous life, Brittany's string of scumbag boyfriends were all people around her. Even the paparazzi could catch her. It was clear how easy it was to coax Brittany. She didn't learn her lesson even though she had been tricked repeatedly. "Eric, ugh. What are you guys doing?" Connolly, who had waited for a while and didn't see Eric, walked out of the restaurant and saw Christina hugging Eric's arm. Seeing Connolly appear, Christina let go of her hand in a panic. Eric shrugged at Connolly and walked straight to the dining room. Christina lowered her head and followed behind him timidly, not daring to look at Connolly's expression at all. Connolly glanced at the two of them suspiciously, but didn't say anything in the end. Dinner was very sumptuous. As soon as Eric walked into the restaurant, Brittany brought a small plate of dumplings to Eric as if she was presenting a treasure. "Mr. Williams, I made these. Would you like to try them?" Eric knew that the chefs had prepared the dumplings for the kids beforehand, so he wasn't worried that he would eat strange dumplings. He smiled and nodded. He took a bowl and took 2 dumplings from Brittany. "This is enough. Thank you." With Brittany taking the lead, the other kids also brought their own dumplings to the table. Christina was the only one who wanted to cry. She had been pestering Eric just now, and she didn't know who had stolen the fruits of her labor. Chapter 447. It was already 10 o'clock at night. In an ordinary apartment in Burbank, Brittany was sitting on the sofa and talking about her experience in the afternoon. Miss Connolly even let us take a helicopter. The seashell villa was so beautiful from the air. Also, from the glass wall of the villa, we could see the entire ocean. In the evening, the entire ocean was sparkling. It was even more spectacular than a landscape painting. Sigh, if only I could afford a manor like this when I grow up. Don't be delusional. I heard that the manor cost more than $50 million to build a few years ago. Because of its fame, even if Eric Williams offered $100 million, someone would definitely buy it. You won't be able to earn that much money in your lifetime, Brittany's brother, Brian Spears, who was already in high school, said. $100 million? Forget it. Brittany stuck out her tongue. She was currently signed to the Disney Children's Channel, and her monthly salary was only $8,000. $100 million was an astronomical figure for her. Jamie Spears, who was sitting on the sofa pretending to watch TV, had actually been listening to his daughter's recount of today's experience. He was still thinking about the Rolls-Royce limousine that he had just sent Brittany back, fantasizing about the day he could own one. When he heard his son mention $100 million, he couldn't help but click his tongue. Lynn Spears, who was breastfeeding his 1-year-old daughter, smiled and said, "Who says it's impossible? If our Boo can become a superstar like Michael Jackson, she will definitely be able to earn $100 million. Michael Jackson was currently the idol of the younger generation in America, and the 16-year-old Brian Spears was no exception. When he heard his mother say that, he retorted, "Michael is a genius. How can Boo compare to him?" After Brian said that, he saw his sister glaring at him and immediately said, "But of course, if Boo wants to live in the Pointy Corner Manor, it's actually very easy. She just needs to become Eric Williams's girlfriend." Brian, don't talk nonsense. How old is your sister? Lynn Spears glared at his son and said. Brian Spears laughed and said, "I heard that Eric Williams likes Loretta a lot. It's not like you haven't seen the news from 2 years ago." "That's nonsense. They did all of that to tarnish Eric's reputation," Brittany immediately retorted as she recalled the incident from 2 years ago. She still had a very good impression of Eric, and she immediately retorted, "I'm not spouting nonsense. If he doesn't like you, why would he invite you to the Sharphorn Manor? Boo, Eric Williams is a rich man. If you become his girlfriend, our family can at least move into Beverly Hills instead of squeezing into this small apartment." Brittany was rather speechless, but a blush immediately appeared on her face at the thought of what her brother had just said. She had just experienced her first awakening of love, so she was very fond of Eric. "Shut up, Brian. If you continue to spout nonsense, you won't be allowed to watch TV anymore. Go back to your room and do your homework." Lynn Spears was not used to his son's tone of selling his sister for glory, so he raised his voice and reprimanded him. The Spears family was just an ordinary family that had just moved from a small place to Los Angeles. They hadn't experienced too many conflicts of interest, so Lynn Spears didn't evolve into a weird mother who sold her daughter's privacy to make money by writing books. However, Jamie Spears, who had been silent all this while, heard his son's words and felt a surge of desire in the depths of his heart. The next morning, after the Spears family had breakfast, Jamie Spears had to send Brittany to the recording studio as usual. While her daughter was changing in her room, Lynn Spears said to her husband, "Jamie, you should find a job. We can't always live on Boo salary." Jamie Spears immediately looked impatient. Clearly, this was not the first time he had heard such words. Jamie Spears was originally a construction worker in a small city in Louisiana. If he was considered to be doing well in Louisiana, then when he came to Los Angeles, there was basically no place for him to use his skills. Furthermore, Jamie Spears was not a hard-working person. In his heart, he disdained to do the same low-class work as those Mexicans who were smuggled over. "Wait a little longer. After I save some more money, I plan to open a construction company," Jamie Spears said as he hurried out of the house and went to the garage to get his car. Lynn Spears looked at her husband's perfunctory back and sighed helplessly. Seeing her daughter come out of the room, she went up to tidy up Brittany's clothes and sent her daughter to the car before returning to the house to do the housework. After dropping Brittany off at the Disney set, Jamie Spears drove to a bar after a series of turns. "Hey, Jamie, the same old?" The old boss behind the bar greeted him warmly. Of course, Jamie Spears replied. He sat down at the bar and greeted the few regulars around him. The boss quickly handed over a glass of beer and a plate of peanuts. The hanging TV in the bar was broadcasting the news. As one of the most talked about news recently, the topic of Firefly's acquisition of Disney still appeared frequently on the small screen. Listening to the introduction of Firefly's acquisition of Disney on the TV, a middle-aged fat man on the left of Jamie Spears shook his head and sighed. $5 billion. It's really hard to imagine that a kid in his early 20s can have $5 billion. How much money is that? Another person immediately laughed and joked, "You're just a lazy guy who cheats unemployment compensation." Of course, you can't imagine how much money $5 billion is. Let me tell you, even if you spend $500,000 a day, it's enough for you to spend for 30 years. The crowd immediately burst into laughter. Although the people who didn't work in the morning and went to the bar were not decent people, the fat middle-aged man was obviously being laughed at by everyone. The fat man laughed and didn't get angry. He looked at Jamie Spears and asked, "Jamie, I heard that your daughter is acting in a show at Disney. I wonder if she can meet Eric Williams. If Eric Williams chooses her to act in a movie, your family will be rich." That's right, that's right. Some time ago, I saw the little actor who acted in Home Alone in the newspaper. That family is doing really well now. Due to his vanity, Jamie Spears said smugly, "Let me tell you, my daughter was a guest at Eric Williams' manor last night." Really? You're not lying, right? Jamie, don't talk nonsense. Why would Eric Williams invite your little girl over? Jamie Spears heard the doubts around him and drank more than half a glass of beer. He blushed and said loudly, "What's there to lie about? My girl was sent back by a Rolls-Royce last night." Seeing that Jamie Spears didn't seem to be lying, a few curious customers gathered around him and asked him what had happened. Jamie Spears' vanity was greatly satisfied, and after he recounted what Brittany had seen and heard in Sharphorn Manor, he started talking nonsense again. He even concluded that Eric had invited a bunch of young men over because he had taken a fancy to his daughter. "Hey, Jamie, how old is your girl? How could Eric Williams like her?" Yeah. Little Brittany is so young. Haha. That's hard to say. Rich people have all kinds of weird fetishes. Eric Williams is still young. What's so strange about him liking little girls? The group of people talked nonsense. Gradually, their words became coarser and coarser, and their words became more and more unscrupulous. In the corner of the bar, a young man in his 20s with a tired face was disgusted by the loud voices of these boorish men. However, when he heard Eric's name, he immediately perked up. The young man's name was Cole Anderson. He was a paparazzi from the New York Post. In order to secretly take photos of a small celebrity's scandal, Cole Anderson had waited outside a certain apartment in Burbank for an entire night. In the end, he found nothing. When he passed by this small bar, he wanted to have a drink and go back to the hotel to sleep. However, he didn't expect to hear a very juicy piece of news. Jamie Spears chatted with the crowd for an hour or two and drank a few glasses of beer. After that, he paid the bill with a slightly tipsy expression and was about to leave. As soon as he stepped out of the bar, he was stopped by Cole Anderson. "Hello, Mr. Jamie Spears. My name is Cole Anderson. I'm a reporter from the New York Post. May I have a moment of your time?" Jamie Spears asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" "It's like this. I just heard that your daughter went to Eric Williams's house as a guest last night. I wonder if I can do an interview about this." Although Jamie Spears drank a little too much, he wasn't drunk. His mind was still quite clear. When he heard that the other party wanted to interview him, his mind quickly spun a few rounds. He stretched out 2 fingers and said, 2,000. Cole Anderson was stunned for a moment. Then, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Although the greedy guy in front of him was asking for an exorbitant price, it was very much in line with the paparazzi's taste. "Mr. Spears, $2,000 is impossible. I can't get $2,000 for writing a special article. At most, I can get 200. Jamie Spears acted as if he had been insulted and raised his voice slightly. 200? Are you trying to dismiss a beggar? That's Eric Williams, a billionaire. Cole Anderson had a patient smile on his face. Mr. Spears, even if Eric Williams has a net worth of billions, that has nothing to do with me. I'm just a reporter who makes a living by writing a few articles. $200 is already very reasonable. The two haggled for a while and finally settled on a price of $500. Cole Anderson didn't bring Jamie Spears back to the bar. Instead, he found an outdoor cafe. Under Jamie Spears' insistence, Cole Anderson paid him $500 first. Then, he took out a tape recorder and began the interview. Jamie Spears was immersed in the joy of picking up $500 for free. Even if he was sober, Gu Chang wouldn't have been able to discover the tricky traps in Cole Anderson's questions. After spending half an hour to complete this interview, both of them left in satisfaction. Back at his place, Cole Anderson, who hadn't slept the entire night, was full of excitement. He spent the entire morning and quickly created a scandal. He misinterpreted Eric's intention of inviting the youths from the Mickey Mouse Club to the Pointy Corner Manor. Although he didn't say it explicitly, every word and sentence led the readers to lead Eric in the direction of a lolicon. The New York Post had always relied on sensationalism, gossip, and digging up the scandals and privacy of celebrities. The paparazzi under the New York Post were also very skilled at splashing dirty water on celebrities while avoiding legal risks. The celebrities who were smeared often couldn't say anything. This was because even if they sued the other party, it was uncertain whether they could win, but the matter would definitely be smeared more and more. This article was quickly sent back to the headquarters of the New York Post. After passing through layers of review, it landed on the desk of the New York Post's chief editor, Mars Allen. Mars Allen could tell at a glance that if this article were to be published, it would definitely bring a lot of trouble to Eric. However, compared to the paparazzi at the bottom who were only responsible for collecting news, Mars Allen had more considerations. The United States seemed to be a place where freedom of speech was excessive. Even the president could be used to ridicule, but in fact, any newspaper knew that those subjects should not be touched. Those were minefields that needed to be avoided. Take the article in front of him as an example. If it were a few years ago, it would have been published. However, Eric was now not only the owner of the Firefly Group, but also had a very close cooperation with the New York Post's owner, the News Corporation. What's more, Mars Allen also knew something about the relationship between Eric and Elizabeth. Based on his understanding of Eric's character, Mars Allen felt that it was unlikely for the man and woman to be together. However, no one knew what would happen in the future. If the article were to be published rashly and annoy Eric, and Murdoch would be involved, he would probably lose his job as the chief editor. However, Eric was a national figure. If the New York Post didn't mention anything about Eric's scandals in the future, it would definitely lose a lot of attention. Besides, after Firefly acquired Disney and was promoted to one of the Big Seven, it had formed a competitive relationship with Fox. Perhaps Murdoch himself would consider suppressing Eric Williams. After thinking about it for a long time, Maris Allen finally decided to send the article to Murdoch himself to test his attitude. Chapter 448. Unlike Lei Sherdong's business philosophy of content being king, Murdoch was more inclined to channel expansion, which was why News Corporation's territory was larger than Viacom's. Because of the rise of the Fox network and the 20th Century Fox Film Company, Murdoch's business focus was also gradually focused on North America. The departure of Barry Diller caused News Corporation's film and television media business in the United States to instantly lose an important pillar, and Murdoch had to temporarily take charge. These days, Murdoch had been presiding over the overall situation at Fox's headquarters in Los Angeles. The success of Friends, The X-Files, and Who Will Be a Millionaire made the development of Fox much smoother than in the original spacetime. Inspired by Warner's CNN and the advantages of News Corporation's own resources, Murdoch had recently begun to prepare for Fox News Station. Another busy day was about to end. When it was close to getting off work, Murdoch's assistant suddenly knocked on the door and walked into the office. He handed a document to him. "Mr. Murdoch, This is a news manuscript that the editor-in-chief of the New York Post, Mars Allen, has just faxed over. Perhaps you need to take a look at it yourself. Murdoch believed that his assistant would not send over an insignificant news manuscript. Since this article was handed to him, it must be special. Leave it here, I'll read it later. Murdoch waved his hand, and the assistant politely left the office. Murdoch quickly reviewed the last few documents at hand, then picked up the news manuscript sent by his assistant. He glanced at the title of the article and frowned slightly. As a media tycoon who relied on news, Murdoch only read the first few paragraphs and was certain that this was completely groundless gossip. Perhaps it would bring some topics for the readers to talk about, but it would definitely cause the parties involved to be dissatisfied. Murdoch quickly finished reading and couldn't help but pick up a document that he had just read. This was part of the financial statement of Fox's media content expenditure this year. Murdoch's eyes quickly fell on the column about Terminator 2. After a Hollywood movie finished screening in theaters, the second round would be the release of videotapes, followed by the third round, which would be broadcast on major North American television stations, cable television stations, and local television stations. After Terminator 2 was shown in theaters and distributed on videotape, it began to bid for the TV station's licensing rights. Under normal circumstances, in order to maximize profits, movies were often broadcast on paid cable channels first, followed by free wireless channels. But because of the shareholding relationship between Firefly and Fox, Firefly made an exception and sold the first-round broadcasting rights to Fox, but the price was still not cheap. Fox had to pay up to $16 million for the first 4 broadcasts, on average, $4 million per broadcast. The cooperation between Fox and Firefly had always been pleasant, but if the article was published by the New York Post, not only would it be seen as a provocation by Eric, but other media forces would certainly think that there was a rift in the cooperation between the two media companies and Firefly's cooperation and Fox. Others, of course, would be. Although Murdoch was aware of his weak position in the cooperation with Firefly, which made him feel very uncomfortable, he would not take any drastic action because of this. He called his assistant again and said, "Tell Mars Allen, if there are any more news reports about Eric Williams, just suppress them." "I understand, Mr. Murdoch." The assistant nodded and walked out. Murdoch looked at the time, stuffed the manuscript into his briefcase, and then went home. T.G.'s Flowers at the End of the Rope, last year was nominated for 5 Oscars. Elizabeth and Drew had originally organized a public relations party together, but received a call from her father in the evening and had to rush back to the Murdoch family's house in Los Angeles for dinner. After dinner, Murdoch looked at his absent-minded daughter, who came to the study with him, and couldn't help but scold her. "You're already so old. Can't you be more mature?" Elizabeth sat down in an office chair, crossed her legs, and said with a smile, "You should say this to my 2 baby brothers. Teske, I heard that James has recently been obsessed with rock and roll. What kind of people are in the rock and roll circle? I hope he won't bring back a daughter-in-law with holes all over her body and a pale face. Oh, this daughter-in-law might not necessarily be a woman." Speaking of his 2 sons, Murdoch had a headache. Looking at his daughter's teasing look, he immediately became angry. "What about you? You're already 24. It's time to think about marriage." Elizabeth's eyes immediately became a little erratic, and she impatiently changed the subject. "Dad, why did you call me back? If there's nothing else, I'm leaving. I still have a lot of things to do." Murdoch didn't know what to do with his stubborn daughter. He knew that if he said anything more, this girl would really run away, so he had no choice but to talk about the main topic. "It's like this. Recently, I felt that Fox's content production is a little weak. What do you think of Fox's acquisition of TG Film Company?" Facing his daughter, Murdoch didn't hide the reason and said very straightforwardly. Elizabeth shrugged and said, "Dad, you know that we can't make the decision for this kind of thing. We still need that guy's approval. Besides, even if we buy it, it's useless. TG has already signed a distribution contract with Firefly. In addition, don't think about Firefly. Even if Firefly has any remaining high-quality projects, they will definitely be handed over to Disney. In the end, Fox still has to do it themselves. Murdoch certainly understood the truth of what Elizabeth said, but now the investment cost of movies was increasing day by day, and the risks were also increasing. However, Fox's big-budget movies in the past few years had not achieved any outstanding results. Last year's box office failure of the summer movie Throne Island and the box office failure of Spielberg's Captain Hawk at the end of the year made many movie companies realize that big-budget movies were not so easy to play. When all the movie companies began to treat big-budget movies cautiously, Firefly announced 4 movie production plans with a total investment of more than $300 million. People couldn't help but admire Eric's confidence and courage in movie investment. Didn't Firefly announce 4 movie production plans? Do you think Fox may participate in the investment? After all, it's $300 million, and Firefly has just acquired Disney, so the funds should be tight. Elizabeth shook her head. The possibility is not high. Movie companies only bring in external investment when they are not very confident about the project. How can he not be confident about the project that he has his eyes on? Moreover, that guy is now regarded as an extremely conservative business operator by Wall Street. He advocates low debt and abundant cash flow. If he doesn't have so much money, he definitely won't launch such a plan. Murdoch sighed and glanced at his daughter. The subtext was obviously saying, "What's the use of having you if you can't do anything?" Elizabeth stared back with dissatisfaction. "Old man, you won't let your daughter sell her body, right? Don't even think about it." Murdoch was instantly annoyed. He shook his head with a wry smile, took out the manuscript from his briefcase, and threw it to Elizabeth. This was handed over by the editor-in-chief of the New York Post in the afternoon. "Take it." Elizabeth curiously took it and flipped through it. Although she also knew that most of the report was nonsense, she still said impolitely, "Again, what a bastard. Sooner or later, he will fall for a woman." Bastard. At noon the next day, in Julia's mansion in Beverly Hills, several women had lunch and talked about this matter. Elizabeth said bitterly again. Bastard. Julia, who was on the other side of the sofa, also smiled and agreed. Tina Fey, who was carrying a little girl, smiled and did not say anything. However, the little girl in her arms, who was about to turn one, cried out, "Eggy!" Drew flipped through the manuscript in front of him and said, "It's not like you don't know what's going on. You should think about how to deal with the aftermath." Who wants to deal with the aftermath for him? Give the manuscript to him and let him deal with it himself. The Super Bowl final is on February 10th. Eric has been busy editing the trailer for Tornado these days. It's better not to bother him with these things. Drew read the manuscript twice seriously and then put it into his bag. He asked Elizabeth, "Do you have the contact of the paparazzo who wrote this article? You have to get the recording back first." Julia looked at Drew's serious face and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. The manuscript has been suppressed anyway." "Of course there's a need. Not only that, I also have to warn the girl's father. Petty people who only care about profits often become very troublesome." Elizabeth smiled and said, You seem to be very experienced." "Of course, because I have such a pair of parents, I know what kind of things such people will often do," Drew said self-deprecatingly. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the 3 people in front of him. His voice slowly became hoarse and evil. "No one can get in Eric's way, let alone hurt him. Neither can you." For a moment, Julia felt that Drew was like a cat with dark eyes in a horror movie, as if he was ready to pounce at any time. Elizabeth also had the same feeling. She said guiltily, "I only said a few words about him. Besides, I didn't wrongly accuse him. He is... okay, I'll get you the contact of that paparazzo." Elizabeth quickly inquired about the contact of Cole Anderson. After Drew wrote it down, he left Julia's house with Tina Fey. Hearing the sound of the car leaving in Drew's house next door, Julia grinned at Elizabeth. "What a little lunatic. She scared me just now." Elizabeth listened to the sound of the car engine fading away. She turned her head and looked at Julia from head to toe. Thinking of herself, she shrugged and turned to walk back to her room. Julia carried the little girl who was dozing off in her arms and followed her. She said, "Liz, why are you acting so weird? Don't tell me you're crazy too. I still have to go to the set of Disguised Stranger in the afternoon. I don't have time to go crazy. You, on the other hand, will go crazy if you stay at home all day long. You should start filming earlier. I've already started to pick out the scripts recently. Hey, do you think there's any TG films that I can act in? Why? Do you also want to act as a crazy woman like Nicole Kidman? Your tone is really sour. You're still complaining that Eric didn't give Tough Cop to TG. Drew clearly said that he had other plans. How would I dare to complain about him? I'm scared that Drew will kill me." After using a check to exchange for the recording of the interview, Drew brought Tina Fey and hurried to Disney's production center. Because of the relationship between Drew and Eric, the director of Mickey Mouse Club, Billy Clark, quickly came out to greet them personally after he heard the notice from the guards at the studio. "Hello, Miss Barrymore." Billy Clark felt a little strange. Eric had just come to the Mickey Mouse Club the day before yesterday. He didn't expect to see another person just one day later. Drew politely shook hands with Billy Clark. The two of them went to Billy Clark's office together. Drew then took out the script and the recording. Billy Clark read through the script and listened to the recording. His expression became a little uneasy. He knew that if these things were reported, it would definitely bring trouble to Eric. After all, the famous director Woody Allen had just been involved in the scandal of his adopted daughter. If the media caught on to similar news, they would definitely hype it up. If this really happened, the production team would definitely be in trouble. "Miss Barrymore, what do you think?" "Mr. Clark, this has nothing to do with you. You don't have to be nervous." Drew comforted him with a smile and said, "Call that girl's father to come over. I'll talk to him personally. Also, can you give me a copy of the information of the actors who were guests at Eric's house that day?" Of course. I'll do it right away," Billy Clark said and hurriedly left the office. Drew quickly obtained the detailed information of the 7 youths and quickly flipped through it. Soon, he eliminated 5 of them, leaving only Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears' information on the 2 girls. After carefully looking at the photos of the 2 girls, the girl pouted and asked Tina Fey beside her, "Tina, what do you think of them?" Tina Fey looked at the photos and said, "They're very cute. Of course, the actors chosen by Disney's Children's Channel are very likable. Drew, I don't think Mr. Williams is that kind of person. He must have just invited these teenagers to be guests at the Pointy Corner Manor." "No, you don't understand." Drew shook his head and said, "After interacting with Eric for a long time, you'll realize that he often looks at some people with that strange gaze that I don't know what it means. It's like he's known them for a long time. I'm sure there's a little guy like that among the 7 of them." "Ah." Tina Fey opened her mouth in shock. She wanted to say something, but she only asked subconsciously, "Then, does he look at me like that when he looks at me?" Drew raised his head and glanced at Tina Fey. He smiled and said, "Of course." Chapter 449. After Jamie Spears sobered up yesterday, he felt that some of the things he said in the interview with the paparazzi were inappropriate. However, after seeing the $500 that he had just picked up, all his concerns were quickly thrown to the back of his mind. Although Britney could get $8,000 a month from Disney, she didn't have much left after paying for the family of 5's expenses in Los Angeles. After getting used to living in a big city, Jamie Spears naturally didn't want to return to a small city in Louisiana. He even considered encouraging his daughter to interact more with Eric. If they could get close to this young billionaire, their family might really be able to move to a wealthy district like Beverly Hills, just like what his son said. After Jamie Spears sent his daughter to Disney in the morning, he specially bought a few newspapers. However, he didn't find anything about yesterday's interview. This made him feel a little regretful. Perhaps his daughter would become famous after that report came out. However, just after noon, he received a call from Disney. He was led to an office door by a staff member. The staff member knocked on the door and said a few words. After getting a response, he signaled for Jamie Spears to go in himself. Jamie Spears pushed the door open a little nervously and walked in. He saw a man and two women sitting on the sofa in the office chatting about something. He had seen the middle-aged man in a gray suit a few times. He was the director of Mickey Mouse Club, Billy Clark. One of the two women was wearing a decent rose-red professional suit. She had short hair, a delicate face, and a pair of black-rimmed glasses that gave off an intellectual vibe. The other girl was wearing a casual light gray sweater. He could only see the side of her face. Although she looked familiar, he couldn't recognize her at first glance. However, her face and delicate little dimples made him certain that she was a pretty little beauty. Billy Clark and Tina Fey stood up when they saw Jamie Spears walk in. Drew glanced at the man in front of her and didn't stand up. Instead, she frowned. She could tell from his slightly red face that he often drank alcohol. This reminded her of some unbearable experiences when she was still very ignorant. "Mr. Spears, this is Miss Tina Fey, and this is Miss Barrymore," Billy Clark introduced them to Jamie Spears in a rather cold tone. Jamie Spears had a smile on his face, but he had already realized from the attitude of the three people that something must have happened. "Mr. Clark, did Bubu cause any trouble?" "Don't worry, if that's the case, I'll definitely teach her a lesson." Billy Clark didn't answer as he turned his head to look at Drew. Only then did Drew lazily stand up and walk to Billy Clark's desk and sit down. He said, "Mr. Clark, sorry to trouble you. Go ahead with your work. I'll have a chat with Mr. Spears." Of course, Billy Clark couldn't wait for that to happen. He said with a smile, "All right then, Miss Barrymore. My secretary is outside. If there's anything, you can get her to call me." "I will." Drew smiled as he watched Billy Clark leave. Only then did he look at the clearly uneasy Jamie Spears. "Miss Barrymore, it's nice to meet you." Well, I really liked your performance in E.T., Jamie Spears complimented a little awkwardly. Drew had already put away the smile on his face. He was even more indifferent to Jamie Spears' compliment. He pointed at the sofa against the wall in front of the desk and gestured for Jamie Spears to sit down. Only then did he let Tina Fey pass the news article to him. "Mr. Spears, you definitely know about my relationship with Eric, so after reading this article, you should know why I'm here, right?" Jamie Spears quickly scanned the news article in his hand and immediately recognized that the contents of the article were the words he had said to the paparazzi when he was drunk yesterday. "Miss Barrymore, this might be a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. This article was bought from you by a paparazzi named Cole Anderson from the New York Post for $500. I still have the recording from yesterday. Do you want to listen to it?" No need." Jamie Spears hurriedly waved his hand. "Miss Barrymore, I'm really sorry. I was drunk yesterday, that's why I said all this nonsense. I can apologize to Mr. Williams, and I can also publicly clarify." Drew smiled disdainfully and said, "Now that you mention it, it reminds me of something Eric said before. If an apology is useful, what's the use of police investigation? Mr. Spears, do you know that the trouble you've caused by saying all this nonsense for $500 might cost you $500,000 or even $5 million to resolve? $5 million. Do you think a construction worker like you can earn that much money in your lifetime?" Although Drew's tone was light, Jamie Spears felt a layer of cold sweat on his back when he heard the figure of $5 million. "I've seen your daughter's photo. She's indeed a very beautiful girl. Being able to be selected for Mickey Mouse Club means that she's also a very outstanding girl. But do you know that in America, there are thousands of girls of the same age who have the same talent as your daughter? Britney Spears was able to get this role not only because of her ability, but also because of her luck. And luck is the most unreliable thing. Because of your nonsense, this luck can come to an abrupt end at any time. Disney can find hundreds of girls of the same age to replace Britney in a day, and your family will have to obediently leave Los Angeles and scram back to a small town in Louisiana." Seeing Jamie Spears open his mouth to speak, Drew raised his small hand to stop him and continued in a somewhat sarcastic tone, "Mr. Spears, do you know that Brittany is just one of the 7 small actors in Mickey Mouse Club that can be replaced at any time? Mickey Mouse Club is just a mediocre TV show on Disney's Children's Channel, and Disney's Children's Channel is just an insignificant TV department of Disney Corporation. Disney Corporation, which used to be on par with the other 6 major film companies, is now just a subsidiary of Firefly Group. In this huge pyramid, Brittany is as insignificant as an ordinary brick, and Eric is the owner of this pyramid. He invited these little guys to his house, which is a great opportunity for them. With this network, they can become Hollywood child stars at any time. Do you know how much Stuart Runkle, who was personally discovered by Eric, earned last year? Let me tell you, $30 million US. But if your nonsense appears in the newspaper this time, it means that you've ruined your daughter's opportunity to earn $30 million US a year for a mere $500 US profit. $30 million US. What a decent and prosperous life you can live with. Now, Mr. Spears, what do you think? You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.